Clara Bennett pressed both hands over her mouth to stop the sound from coming out. Not a cry, not a scream, something worse. Something that lived below words in the place a woman goes when she has been broken so many times she stops expecting anything different. She hadn't meant for him to see her like this, but Ethan Whitaker was already standing in the doorway, and he didn't look away. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1882 came down hard on Harlan Creek, Montana. The kind of heat that cracked the ground open and made men mean. By July, the river had dropped to a whisper, and the cattle were restless, and the people of that town had grown restless too, the way people do when the sky refuses to give them rain, and they need something to blame. Ethan Whitaker didn't pay much attention to what the town wanted. He never had. His ranch sat 3 miles east of Harlan Creek's main road, up a long dirt path bordered by juniper scrub and dry grass that turned gold in the afternoon light. It was a working ranch, not grand, not prosperous, but honest. He had 14 horses, a hired hand named Pete, who came 3 days a week, a dog named Colt, who slept under the porch, and about 40 acres of grazing land that he'd bought with money he'd earned the hard way. He'd been alone on that land for 4 years. He hadn't minded it. Or at least that was what he told himself. He was out checking the fence line along the eastern pasture on that Tuesday morning when he first heard the wheels. The creak and groan of a cart with a bad axle. The kind of sound that said whoever was driving hadn't had the money to fix it in a long while. He turned one hand, shading his eyes against the morning glare, and watched a battered wagon pull up and stop just outside his gate. The horse pulling it was half dead with thirst. The woman holding the reins didn't look much better. She climbed down from the wagon seat slowly, like every movement cost her something. She wore a dark dress, brown or something close to it, and her boots were worn through at the toes. Her hair was pinned back, but half of it had come loose and hung damp around her neck. There was a bruise along her left jaw that she hadn't tried to cover. She stood at his gate with her chin up and her hands at her sides, and she looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not looking for charity," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "I heard you might need help with bookkeeping. I can read, write, and keep accounts. I work hard and I don't complain. That's all I'm offering." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her at the road she'd come from. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Harlan Creek." "You walk that whole way?" "Most of it." She didn't elaborate. He studied her face. Not the bruise, though he'd seen it, but her eyes. Dark brown, steady, and carrying something heavy in them. Not the wild look of someone who'd done something wrong and was running. He knew that look. He'd seen it plenty. This was different. This was the look of someone who'd had something done to them and couldn't outrun it, no matter how fast they moved. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara Bennett." The name landed on him like a stone dropped in still water. He kept his face neutral. He'd heard that name. 3 days ago, in fact, at Dolan's supply store. He'd been waiting on a crate of nails when he'd caught the tail end of a conversation between 2 men he didn't know well, ranchers from the south side of the county. They'd been talking about a woman who'd worked for the Caldwell family, about how she'd stolen silver and lied about it, about how Victor Caldwell himself had vouched for the charges, about how she'd been run out of town before the sheriff could get his hands on her. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now she was standing at his gate. He stepped forward and unlatched the fence. "Come on in," he said. She blinked, just once, like she hadn't quite believed he was going to say that. "Mr. Whitaker. Ethan Whitaker." He pushed the gate open and held it. "Bring your horse around to the trough first. She looks like she needs it more than you do, and that's saying something." Clara Bennett walked through his gate. He gave her the room off the back of the barn. It had been a foreman's quarters, once small but solid, with a window that faced east and a door that latched from the inside. He didn't explain why he mentioned the latch. She didn't ask. But he saw her shoulders drop slightly when he pointed it out, and he understood something about her situation without needing to be told. Pete was out that day, which Ethan was quietly grateful for. He wasn't ready to field questions. He heated water on the stove and left a basin outside the room door. He went back to his fence line and didn't return to the house until late afternoon, by which time the smell of something cooking was coming from his kitchen. He stopped on the porch steps. The last time he'd come home to a cooked meal, Eleanor had been alive. He stood there longer than he meant to. Then he pushed through the door. Clara was at the stove. She'd found the salt pork and the dried beans and the half onion he'd left sitting on the shelf, and she'd turned it into something that smelled like food, real food, the kind a man could sit down to. She didn't turn around when he came in. "I figured cooking was part of it," she said. "If it's not, I can stop." "No," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "No, that's fine." She set 2 bowls on the table. He noticed she hesitated before sitting down, like she was waiting for permission or waiting for something to go wrong. He pulled out his chair and sat first, and after a moment, she sat across from him. They ate in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was the silence of 2 people who had both learned that words got you in trouble and quiet kept you safe. After a while, he said, "I know who you are." Her spoon stopped moving. "I know what they're saying about you in town," he continued. "I heard it 3 days ago at Dolan's." She set the spoon down very carefully. Her hands were flat on the table now. "Then why did you let me in?" she asked. He considered the question. "Because I know Victor Caldwell," he said, "and I know the kind of man he is." She looked up at him then. Something moved across her face, a cracking the way ice cracks before it breaks, though she held herself perfectly still. "You believe me," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I believe that man has never once in his life pointed a finger at someone who actually deserved it," Ethan said. "And I believe that bruise on your face didn't come from a fall off a horse." A long silence. "No," she said quietly. "It didn't." She told him some of it that night. Not all, she wasn't ready for all of it, and he didn't push. But enough. She'd come to Harlan Creek 8 months ago from Billings following work. She'd answered an advertisement placed by the Caldwell household. They'd needed someone to manage household accounts and correspondence. Someone educated enough to handle the paperwork. Victor Caldwell didn't want to deal with himself. She'd been good at the work. Better than they'd expected. That had been the first problem. Victor Caldwell was a man who did not like to be made to feel small by anyone, and especially not by a woman with a steady hand and an eye for numbers. When Clara had noticed discrepancies in the account's money moving in ways that didn't add up, payments to people who didn't appear in any record she could find, she'd made the mistake of asking about it. "What did he say?" Ethan asked. "He smiled," Clara said. "That was what scared me most. He smiled, and he said I must have made an error, and he suggested I go back and check my figures." She paused. 2 days later, my employer's wife told me that some of her silver had gone missing, and that one of the maids had seen me near the cabinet where it was kept. "You hadn't been near it." "I had walked past that hallway twice in 8 months, Clara said. "Both times with Mrs. Caldwell herself." Ethan set his coffee down. "He needed you gone," he said. "He needed me gone before I figured out what the numbers meant," she said. "I still don't know exactly what he's hiding, but I know it's enough that he was willing to destroy my reputation to make sure I stopped looking." The next morning, Pete arrived. He was a lean, sun-dried man of about 50, quiet and reliable, and he'd worked for Ethan for 3 years without once asking a question he didn't need the answer to. He saw Clara coming out of the back quarters and stopped walking. He looked at Ethan. "She's working the books," Ethan said simply. Pete looked back at Clara. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. That was the full extent of it. Pete went to the barn. Clara went to the kitchen. Ethan went to the pasture. By noon, though, Pete had found a reason to come to the water pump at the same time Clara was there, and Ethan happened to be near enough to hear what was said. "You're the Bennett woman," Pete said. Not unkindly, just stating it. "I am," Clara said. "They're saying things about you in town." "I know." Pete was quiet for a moment. He turned the pump handle and let the water run. "My wife was accused of something she didn't do once," he said. "Back in '71. Took 3 years before the truth came out." He paused. "I hope yours comes out faster." He walked back toward the barn without another word. Clara stood at the pump with water running over her hands and didn't move for a long moment. The trouble from town came faster than Ethan had expected. He'd anticipated gossip. He'd known there would be talk. Harlan Creek was the kind of place where a man couldn't shoe his horse on a Tuesday without someone knowing about it by Wednesday. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly it would organize itself into something with an edge. It was 4 days after Clara arrived when the first men came, 3 of them on horseback riding up the long dirt path in the afternoon. Ethan was on the porch when he saw them coming. He recognized 2 of them, Holt Davies and his brother Wren, who ran cattle on the west side of the county. The third was a man he didn't know, heavy-set with a leather vest and an expression like he'd already made a decision about this visit and wasn't interested in changing it. Ethan stepped off the porch and stood in the yard. I didn't reach for his gun. He didn't need to. He just stood there the way a man stands when he is on his own land, and he knows it. The 3 men pulled up. "Ethan," Holt said. He had the tone of a man who'd rehearsed what he was going to say. "We heard you took in that Bennett woman." "I hired someone to manage my accounts," Ethan said. "That's my business." "That woman is wanted for theft," the heavy-set man said. He had a flat, hard voice. "Victor Caldwell himself has pressed the charges." "Victor Caldwell presses a lot of things," Ethan said. "Doesn't make them true." Holt shifted in his saddle. "Now, Ethan, nobody's saying you meant any harm by it. You probably just didn't know. But having her here, it's not good for your reputation, and it ain't safe for this community." "How's a woman doing my bookkeeping a threat to this community? She's a thief and a liar." "She's a woman who got accused," Ethan said. His voice stayed level. "By a man who benefits from the accusation. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at each of them in turn. "I'll thank you to get off my property." A long, tight silence. The heavy-set man's jaw tightened. "Caldwell's not going to forget this Whitaker." "I expect he won't," Ethan said. He watched them ride back down the path. He didn't move until the dust settled. Then he turned and found Clara standing 10 feet behind him, just outside the barn door. She'd heard all of it. Her face was pale. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he said, "I did." She opened her mouth and closed it again. "Then, they'll make trouble for you." "Probably." "This isn't worth it. I can go. I can find somewhere else." "Clara." He said her name plainly without decoration. "I don't run people off my land because Victor Caldwell sent 3 of his friends to suggest I ought to." She stared at him. "Now." He picked up the saddle he'd set on the fence post before they arrived. "I was about to work Duchess on the south pasture. If you want to learn to handle a horse, today's as good a day as any." It took her a moment to find her footing. "I don't know the first thing about horses," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I said I'd teach you." That evening, she sat at his kitchen table with his ledger open in front of her and a lamp pushed closer to the page. He'd watched her work for about 20 minutes, the focused quiet of someone who genuinely understood numbers, who could see patterns in them the way other people read words. "You weren't lying about the bookkeeping," he said from across the room. "I don't lie," she said. She said it matter-of-factly, not as a point of pride, just as a statement. "I've seen what lying costs." He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one near her elbow without interrupting her concentration. "These figures," she said, not looking up. "Your feed costs in April are off." "I know. Pete ordered double on the oats because we had a hard winter. You should carry that forward as an offset. Otherwise, it'll look like you're hemorrhaging money in the spring quarter, and you're not." He looked at her. "Where did you learn accounting?" he asked. She glanced up briefly. "My father ran a dry goods store. I kept his books from the time I was 12. A pause. "He died when I was 19. I kept working anyway. It was the only thing I was good at that anyone would pay for." "It's a rare skill," he said. "It's a rare skill that people keep being surprised a woman has," she said, and went back to the ledger. He sat with his coffee and didn't argue. On the 5th day, a rock came through the window of the back quarters. Clara hadn't been inside, she'd been in the kitchen, and so no one was hurt. But the message was plain enough. Wrapped around the rock was a scrap of paper with 3 words written on it in heavy pencil. Leave or else. Ethan found her standing in the doorway of the damaged room, looking at the rock on the floor and the broken glass around it. She hadn't picked it up. She hadn't touched anything. She was just looking at it with a stillness that was worse somehow than if she'd been crying. "Clara," he said. She didn't turn. "Clara." He came to stand beside her. "This is the 3rd time," she said. He frowned. "3rd time someone's thrown a rock at you. 3rd time someone's tried to drive me out of somewhere by scaring me." Her voice was flat. "Billings. Then a town called Mercy Falls after I left Harlan Creek the first time. I made it 2 weeks there before someone burned a rag in my doorway." She paused. "And now here." He stood quietly and let her say it. "I'm so tired," she said. And it wasn't weakness in her voice. It was something deeper and more honest than weakness. It was the voice of someone who has been strong for a very long time and is naming clearly and plainly the weight of it. "I'm so tired of being the thing that someone wants gone." "You're not a thing," he said. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't a woman who cried easily, he was learning. She processed things in a different way, with stillness, with precision, with a quiet that had iron in it. "I won't leave," she said. "I want you to know that. Not because I have nowhere else to go, though that's also true, but because I'm done letting him win by making me run." Ethan looked at her steadily. "Good," he said. He picked up the rock. He looked at the note. "I know this handwriting," he said quietly. She looked at the note in his hand. "Whose is it?" she asked. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. "Someone who wouldn't have done this on his own," he said. "Someone who was told to." On the 7th night, she found him sitting on the porch after dark. She'd meant to go straight to the back quarters, but something stopped her at the door. The way he was sitting, not relaxed, not at ease. Still. The way a man sits when he's carrying something and has nowhere to set it down. She sat in the other chair. A long time passed without either of them speaking. Then he said without looking at her, "I had a woman I was going to marry. 4 years ago." Clara was quiet. She didn't fill the silence. "Her name was Eleanor," he said. "We were riding up to Copper Ridge. There was a cave-in at one of the mining camps, a rock slide. Her horse spooked and threw her on a downhill stretch." He stopped. "She died 3 days later. She never woke up." Clara looked at his profile in the dark. "I built this ranch after," he said. "I thought if I could build something with my hands, something I could see and touch, then—" He stopped again. "Then something. I don't know. I don't know what I thought." "That it would give you something to hold on to," Clara said quietly. He was silent for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Something like that." She didn't tell him she was sorry. She sensed he'd heard that too many times, and that it meant less each time. Instead, she said, "The horses. That's why you love them the way you do." He turned to look at her. "Eleanor used to say horses were the most honest things in the world," he said. "She said they don't pretend. They either trust you or they don't." Clara looked out at the dark pasture. "She sounds like she was right," she said. Another long quiet. Not empty full somehow, in the way a room is full after something important has been said. "Thank you," she said finally, "for telling me." He nodded once. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." By the end of the 2nd week, Clara had ridden Duchess 3 times. The first time she'd stayed on for about 40 yards before the mare had shifted sideways, and Clara had ended up sitting in the dirt with a look on her face of pure, clear-eyed indignation. Ethan had kept a completely straight face all the way to the point where she'd stood up, brushed herself off and said, "Again." And then he'd allowed himself a small smile directed at the fence post. The 2nd time she'd made it across the south pasture. The 3rd time she'd been up in the saddle for nearly an hour, moving with the horse instead of against it, her back straight, her hands quiet on the reins. He'd watched her from the fence and felt something unfamiliar. Not quite what he expected. Not the soft, complicated grief that Eleanor's memory usually brought with it, but something else, something cautious and small and alive. He'd turned away from it before he could name it. It was Pete who warned him first. 3 days after the rock through the window, Pete found Ethan in the barn and said without preamble, "Victor Caldwell was in Harlan Creek day before yesterday. He was talking to Judge Harlan." Ethan stopped what he was doing. "What kind of talking?" he asked. "The kind that involves land deeds," Pete said. "Walt Briggs told me. Said Caldwell had a stack of papers and was asking questions about property boundaries on the East Quarter." Pete met his eyes. "Your East Quarter, Ethan?" The East Quarter was the best grazing land on the ranch. It bordered the creek which hadn't dried up the way the river had, and it was the stretch that made the difference between a ranch that could survive a bad summer and one that couldn't. Ethan said nothing for a moment. "There anything irregular about your deed?" Pete asked. "No," Ethan said. "I bought that land clean. I have the papers." "Might be worth having someone look at them anyway," Pete said carefully. "Someone who knows what to look for." They looked at each other. They were thinking the same thing. That night, Ethan spread the land deed across the kitchen table. Clara was already there working on the ledger. She looked up when he put the deed down in front of her. "Pete says Caldwell is looking at my property lines," he said. "The East Quarter." She understood immediately. She set the ledger aside and drew the deed toward her. She read it carefully. Her finger moved along the lines of text without touching the paper, tracing the language, the legal descriptions, the measurements and boundaries. "This deed is in order," she said. "I know it is." "But that doesn't matter if he can produce a counter-document," she said. "Something predating yours, something that claims a prior claim to the land." "Can he do that?" She looked up at him. "He had someone bury a theft charge against me in 3 days," she said. "He has money connections and a judge who owes him favors." She paused. "So yes, he can try." Ethan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Then we need to find what he's hiding," he said. "Whatever it was in those accounts that you saw." "I didn't take any records with me when I left," she said. "I didn't have time." "But you remember them." She looked at him steadily. "I remember everything," she said. A silence fell over the table. Not the silence of helplessness, but something harder. Something that had its feet planted. "Then we start tomorrow," he said. Clara nodded once. She looked back down at the deed and then at her own hands flat on the table on either side of it. "He's going to come after you harder now," she said, "when he realizes you're not going to back down." "I know. I need you to understand what that means," she said. "He doesn't just ruin reputations, Ethan. He ruins people. He has the money to drag this out for years. He has the connections to make problems disappear. And he has—" She stopped. Something flickered across her face. Something she was keeping behind her teeth. "Clara." His voice was low. "What aren't you telling me?" She was quiet for 3 long seconds. "The night before I left Harlan Creek," she said. "He came to the room where I was boarding. He didn't knock. He just opened the door." Her voice was perfectly controlled. "He told me that if I spoke about what I'd seen in the accounts to anyone at all, he would make certain that what happened to me would be the kind of thing that followed a woman for the rest of her life." She paused. And then he smiled. The same smile as before. Ethan's hands were very still on the table. "And then you left," he said. "And then I left," she said, "because I was afraid." She met his eyes. "I'm still afraid. I want to be honest with you about that. But I'm less afraid of him than I am of spending the rest of my life being the woman who ran when it mattered." He held her gaze for a long moment. "You're the bravest person on this ranch," he said quietly. "And that includes Pete." Something shifted in her face, not a smile exactly, but a loosening, a brief, startled warmth. "Don't tell Pete that," she said. "Wouldn't dare," he said. And for the first time since she'd walked through his gate, Clara Bennett laughed a short, real sound, surprised out of her. It was gone almost as soon as it arrived. But it had been there. Ethan got up to refill the coffee, and he didn't let himself examine the feeling that had settled in his chest. Not yet. There was too much work to do. The next morning started like any other on Ethan Whitaker's ranch. Pete out early with the horses, the smell of coffee on the stove, the sound of boots on dry ground. But something had changed overnight. Not in the land, not in the weather. In the two people who sat across from each other at the kitchen table, with a stack of papers between them and a purpose neither of them had spoken out loud yet. Clara had been up before dawn. Ethan found her already at the table when he came down a fresh page in front of her, her handwriting small and exact across the top of it. She'd written a heading in plain letters, "What I saw in the Caldwell accounts." He poured his coffee and sat down without a word. She looked up briefly. "I've been trying to reconstruct as much as I can from memory. The payments are the clearest. I have a good head for numbers. Names are harder, but I remember several." He set his cup down. "Walk me through it." She took a breath. "Victor Caldwell is moving money," she said. "Not stealing it outright, he's too careful for that. What he's doing is more like redirecting it. He takes land assessments and underreports the value. He pays surveyors to file incorrect boundary measurements. He has 2 clerks at the county office who have been on his payroll for at least 2 years. She tapped the page. "The money flows through a land company. On paper, it looks legitimate. But if you compare the filed assessments against the actual acreage being transferred, the numbers don't match." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He's buying land for less than it's worth," he said. "He's buying land for a fraction of what it's worth," she corrected. "Because he has people inside the county system telling him which properties are going to be assessed, what the assessed values will be, and how to file counterclaims that undercut the original owners." She paused. "He's been doing it for at least 3 years, possibly longer." Ethan stared at the page. "How much land are we talking about? In Harlan Creek County alone?" She looked at her notes. "Based on what I saw, at least 6 ranches, possibly 9. Small operations, most of them. People who didn't have the resources to fight a legal challenge." She looked up. "And he's not done." The words settled between them like a stone. "He wants the east quarter," Ethan said. "He wants everything east of the creek line," Clara said. "Your land, the Briggs property, the old Dunmore place that's sitting empty since the family moved north." She set down her pen. "That stretch of land follows the only reliable water source in the county for 12 miles. Whoever controls that water controls grazing rights for the whole eastern valley." She looked at him steadily. "That's not about one ranch, Ethan. That's about the whole county." He stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, his hand braced against the frame. "He tried to do this to you," he said. "He put you in the position of knowing too much, and then he destroyed you before you could tell anyone." "Yes." He turned around. "He's going to do it again," he said. "To me, if we let him." "Yes." A pause. "What do we need to prove it?" he asked. Clara turned back to her page. "Documentation," she said. "Comparison of the filed assessments against actual land records. Sworn testimony from at least one of the people he's already bought out, someone willing to say on record that they were pressured." She paused. "And we need someone inside the county office who hasn't been bought." "I know the county registrar," Ethan said. "Old man Sutter. He's been in that office since before Caldwell had 2 nickels to rub together." He came back to the table. "If anyone in that building is still clean, it's Sutter." "Can you trust him?" Ethan thought about it. Really thought, not just reassured. "I think so," he said finally. "But I need to be careful how I approach it. If Caldwell has eyes in that office, and hears I'm asking questions about land records, he'll move faster," Clara said. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then we have to move faster than him," she said. It was Pete who gave them their first real break, and he did it without knowing what he was giving them. He came in from Harlan Creek 3 days later with supplies and a look on his face that meant he'd heard something. He set the goods on the kitchen table and said without being asked, "Ran into Amos Pruitt at the feed store. You know Amos had that small place up by the North Ridge, sold it off last spring." "I remember," Ethan said. "He said the county assessment came in low and he couldn't afford to keep it running." "He said a lot of things at the feed store today," Pete said, "including that he didn't sell that land. Not really. He said a man from a land company came to him with a county assessment document that showed his property was worth about a third of what he'd paid for it 3 years ago. He said when he tried to contest it, he was told it would take 18 months and the legal fees would be more than the land was worth anyway. Pete looked at Ethan. He signed the transfer because he didn't think he had a choice. Clara had been standing near the stove. She moved to the table now. "Who was the man from the land company?" she asked. Pete looked at her. He didn't give his name, but Amos said he had a way of talking real smooth, like everything was already settled before you opened your mouth. He paused. And he said the man had a ring, silver with a blue stone. Said he kept turning it on his finger when he talked. Clara's face went perfectly still. Ethan looked at her. "You've seen that ring," he said. She nodded once. Her voice was controlled. "Victor Caldwell wears it every day," she said. Pete looked between the two of them. He was a man who picked up on things without needing them spelled out. "What do you need me to do?" he said. Ethan pulled out a chair. "Sit down," he said. "We need to talk." They spent the better part of that evening laying it out, all of it. Pete listened without interrupting, which was the thing Ethan valued most about him. He didn't jump ahead, didn't fill silence with noise, didn't react until he understood what he was reacting to. When Clara finished walking through what she'd seen in the accounts, Pete sat back in his chair and blew out a slow breath. "So he's running a scheme through the county office," he said. "Using fake assessments to tank property values, buying out small ranchers who can't fight back, and building up a land block along the creek line." "That's the shape of it," Ethan said. "And when you got close to figuring that out?" Pete looked at Clara. "He made sure I wouldn't be believed," she said simply. Pete was quiet for a moment. "You need Amos Pruitt," he said finally. "If he's willing to talk. And you need those assessment documents." "That's where old Sutter comes in," Ethan said. "If he has the original filed records and they don't match what Pruitt was shown." "Then Caldwell's people are filing false documents with the county," Clara said. "Which is fraud. Federal fraud depending on how the land titles are structured." A silence. Pete looked at Ethan. "This is bigger than I thought," Pete said. "It's bigger than any of us thought," Ethan agreed. Pete stood up from the table. He picked up his hat from the bench by the door. "I'll talk to Amos," he said. "Careful like. Man to man, nothing that looks like it's connected to anything." He put the hat on. "He's angry enough. I think he's been looking for someone to tell." He went out. The door closed behind him. Clara and Ethan sat alone at the table. "If Caldwell finds out we're talking to Pruitt," she began. "I know," Ethan said. "Ethan." She said his name the way she said everything, directly without softening. "If this goes wrong, he will take this ranch, and he will make sure that whatever he does to you, no one in this county will question it. He has practice." She held his gaze. "I need you to understand that before we go any further." He looked back at her steadily. "I understood that when I let you through the gate," he said. She studied him for a moment. "Why?" she asked. Not accusingly, genuinely. "You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. Why take that on?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Because Eleanor died on a trail that every man in this county knew was dangerous that season," he said slowly. "And not one of them had told the people riding it. They were too busy not wanting to make trouble." He looked at this table. "I decided a long time ago that when I saw something wrong happening, I wasn't going to be the man who looked the other way because it was easier." A pause. "Even when looking away would have been smarter." Clara didn't say anything for a moment. "Then, she would have liked you, the person you are, because of her." He looked up. "I think she'd have liked you more," he said. The morning Pete went to talk to Amos Pruitt. Ethan rode into Harlan Creek. He hadn't told Clara where he was going. She had work to do, and he didn't want her anywhere near the county office if things went sideways. He rode in quiet, tied his horse at the far end of the main street, and went to the county registrar's office through the side door. Sutter was behind his desk, a small, dry-looking man with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers who had been managing the county records for 22 years and had never, to Ethan's knowledge, done a dishonest thing in his life. He looked up when Ethan came in. "Whitaker," he said. "Not unfriendly, but watchful. Didn't expect to see you today." Ethan sat down across from him without being invited. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And I need it to stay between us." Sutter set down his pen. He looked at Ethan for a moment, and then he got up and went to the door and turned the latch. He came back to his desk. "All right," he said quietly. "Talk." Ethan laid it out as plainly as he could. The assessments, the property transfers, Amos Pruitt's story, the numbers Clara had reconstructed. He didn't use her name. He didn't need to. Sutter listened. His face didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened in a way that told Ethan he wasn't surprised by everything he was hearing. When Ethan finished, the old man was quiet for a long time. "The East Quarter assessment," he said finally. "The one filed on your land last week." Ethan went still. "I didn't know one had been filed." Sutter opened his desk drawer and took out a document. He set it in front of Ethan. It was an official county assessment of the East Quarter of Ethan's land, dated 6 days ago, signed by an assessor Ethan had never heard of. The stated value was less than half what Ethan had paid for it in 1879. His hands were flat on the desk, very still. "This was filed without notification," Ethan said. "Assessments don't require prior notification under county code," Sutter said carefully. "But they do require a certified assessor. And the name on that document," he tapped it with one finger, "is not a name I recognize from our certified list." Meaning either a new assessor was certified and I wasn't informed, Sutter said, or someone filed this document with a name that isn't real. The two men looked at each other. "If someone filed a fraudulent assessment with this office," Ethan said slowly, "and used it to initiate a property transfer, it would be a criminal matter," Sutter said. "Federal if the transfer crosses certain value thresholds." He folded his hands on the desk. "Which this one would." Ethan sat back. "How long do I have?" he asked. Sutter looked at the document. "A contested assessment requires a 30-day response window before a transfer can be initiated," he said. "If you file a formal objection within that window, the process halts." He paused. "But the objection needs to be documented. Evidence of fraud, not just your word against the assessment." "How much evidence?" "Enough to put in front of a federal circuit judge," Sutter said. He met Ethan's eyes. "Whitaker, if what you're telling me is accurate, this isn't just about your land. This man has been defrauding property owners in this county for years. The evidence that undoes one case undoes all of them." He paused again. "But the person who brings that evidence is going to need to be prepared for what comes after." "I know," Ethan said. "No." Sutter's voice was careful and precise. "I don't think you do. Victor Caldwell has been very deliberate about who he goes after. Small operations, people without resources, people who can't survive a legal fight." He looked at Ethan directly. "You're not a small operation, but you're also not a man with powerful friends. If he decides to come at you hard, he's already coming at me," Ethan said. "He's been coming at me since the day I let someone through my gate who knew too much about him." Sutter was quiet. "Then you've already made your choice," he said. "Yes," Ethan said. "I have." He rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon with the document folded inside his vest and a weight in his chest that wasn't fear exactly, but was something close enough to feel like it. Clara was in the barn when he got back. She'd been spending time with the horses in the afternoons, now after her work was done. Duchess had taken to her, which Ethan found quietly satisfying, though he hadn't said so. She came out of the barn when she heard his horse and stood watching him dismount, with an expression that meant she could already read something in how he was moving. "What happened?" she said. He pulled the document from his and handed it to her without a word. She read it. He watched her face as she read it, the small tightening around her eyes, the way her jaw set. She looked up. "He's already filed," she said. 6 days ago. Before Pete talked to Amos. Before you went to Sutter." She looked back at the document. "He didn't wait to see if you'd back down. He's already started the process." "I was always going to," Ethan said. I think the men he sent Holt and the others, that wasn't a warning. That was a test. He wanted to see if I'd hand you over voluntarily and save him the trouble." Clara looked up from the document. "And when you didn't," she said. "He moved to Plan 2, Ethan said, which was always taking the land directly." She handed the document back to him. 30 days, she said, to file a formal objection with documented evidence of fraud. "That's not enough time to build a case from scratch," she said. "We'd need the original assessments from at least 3 other properties to establish a pattern. We'd need Amos Pruitt's testimony. We'd need to identify the fake assessor." She was thinking quickly. He could see it the way her eyes moved slightly when she was working something through. "And we'd need someone to carry the case to the circuit court, because Judge Harlan in this county is in Caldwell's pocket. I know a lawyer in Billings," Ethan said. "A man named Garrison. He's honest and he's capable. But getting him here and up to speed on 30 days. "Write to him tonight," Clara said. "Don't wait. Every day we wait, he has more time to shore up his documentation, and we have less." She paused. "Do you have paper?" "In the house." "Then let's go write the letter." She was already moving toward the house. He fell into step beside her, and for a moment, just one, they were simply 2 people walking together in the same direction, toward the same thing, and it was the most natural feeling he'd had in 4 years. He didn't examine it. There wasn't time. Pete came back that evening with news that changed the shape of everything. Amos Pruitt was willing to talk. More than willing. Once Pete had explained carefully in general terms that he wasn't the only one Caldwell had done this to, and that there might be a way to fight it. Amos had sat down on his porch and talked for 2 hours straight. He had kept his copy of the false assessment. He had kept the correspondence from the land company. And he had a name. "The assessor who filed on his property," Pete said. The name on the document. Amos looked it up afterward because he couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. There's no licensed assessor by that name in Montana Territory. He set a folded piece of paper on the table. "But there is a man by that name on the payroll of the Caldwell Land Company." Clara unfolded the paper. She looked at the name written there. Her breath went out of her slowly. "I know this name," she said. Both men looked at her. "He was in the accounts," she said. "Regular payments. I thought he was a contractor, a surveyor of some kind." She looked up. "His payments tripled in the 6 months before I left." The room was very quiet. "That's the link," Ethan said. "That's the link," she agreed. A man on Caldwell's payroll filing fraudulent assessments under an unlicensed name, receiving payments that increased in direct proportion to the number of properties being assessed. She pressed both hands flat on the table. "That's not circumstantial anymore. That's a pattern." Pete looked at Ethan. "Is that enough?" he asked. "It's enough to start with," Ethan said. "If Garrison agrees to take it, get him here," Clara said. Her voice was steady and clear. "Write that letter tonight and get it on the first stage out tomorrow morning." The letter went out the next morning, and 3 days after that, the second wave hit. It started at the hardware store. Ethan rode in for supplies and felt the change before he could name what it was. The slight shift in the room, the conversations that stopped a half-beat too early. The man behind the counter who'd known him for years met his eyes and then looked away. He bought what he needed and left. He was halfway down the main street when he heard his name, not shouted, said, calmly and with the particular tone of a man who wants an audience. He turned. Victor Caldwell was standing in front of the bank. He was about 50, broad-shouldered, with a well-made coat and boots that cost more than most men in Harlan Creek earned in a month. He had a rancher's tan and a politician's smile, and he wore his silver ring on his right hand, the way other men wore badges. "Whitaker," he said again. "I've been hoping to run into you." The street had not emptied, but it had gotten quieter. Ethan stopped walking. "Caldwell," he said. Victor came toward him with his hand extended like they were two neighbors meeting at a social. Like the assessment document wasn't already filed. Like the rock hadn't come through Clara's window. Ethan didn't take his hand. The smile stayed exactly where it was. "I heard you've been struggling with the summer heat out at your place," Victor said pleasantly. "Tough year for ranchers. I know you've had some complications on top of that. He looked at Ethan with an expression of practiced sympathy. I'd like to help. I'm prepared to make you a very fair offer on the East Quarter. Relieve some of that pressure. That land's not for sale, Ethan said. Everything's for sale, Victor said. At the right price. Not that land, Ethan said. Not to you, not ever. A silence. The smile shifted still there, but the edges of it were different now. Something showed through. You should think carefully about what you're protecting, Victor said. His voice was still pleasant, but there was something underneath it now. Something with no warmth in it at all. A woman with a theft charge on her name and no proof of anything she says. A legal challenge that will cost you more than that land is worth. He tilted his head slightly. And for what a stranger who walked through your gate. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. She's not a stranger anymore, he said. He walked past Victor Caldwell without another word. He didn't turn to see if the man was watching him go. He didn't need to. He could feel it. He told Clara about the encounter that evening. She was quiet for a long time after he finished. He came to you personally, she said. Yes. That means he's concerned, she said. If he thought this was going to go his way without effort, he wouldn't waste his time on a public conversation. She looked at the table. He's trying to assess how committed you are. And now he knows, Ethan said. And now he knows. She agreed. She paused. He's going to escalate. I expect so. She looked at him directly. Are you ready for that? She asked. He met her eyes. Are you? He asked. She held his gaze. I have been waiting for 3 years for an opportunity to stop running and turn around, she said. I am ready. He nodded. They sat at the table together for a while after that, not talking, not working. Just present in the same room, with the same quiet certainty. Outside, Colt moved on the porch, and the night wind came in through the open window, and somewhere out in the pasture, one of the horses called, and another answered. 4 days later. 2 things happened on the same morning. The first was that a letter arrived from Billings. Garrison was coming. He'd read Ethan's description of the situation, and he'd written back in terse, precise language that was more exciting than if he'd written a page of enthusiasm. This has the shape of something I've seen before, and it was wrong then too. Expect me in 9 days. Have everything documented. Ethan read the letter twice and handed it to Clara without comment. She read it, and something loosened in her face, a tension she'd been holding for days without either of them acknowledging it. 9 days, she said. We keep building the case, he said. Every day between now and then, we add to what we have. The second thing that happened that morning was that Pete came in from the east pasture with a look that meant something was wrong before he said a word. Fence is cut, he said. 3rd post from the creek marker. Clean cut, not wear, not weather. Someone took a blade to it. Ethan set down his coffee. The horses, he asked. Still in the pasture. Duchess is spooked, though. She was close to the fence line when it happened. Clara was already on her feet. He's escalating, she said. She looked at Ethan. First the people he sent, then the rock, now the fence. He's trying to push me into a reaction, Ethan said. Into doing something that gives him cause to file a complaint. Don't give it to him, she said immediately. I don't intend to. He picked up his hat. Pete, fix the fence and document where it was cut. Measurement, location, clean edge. Write it down. Yes, sir, Pete said. Clara caught Ethan's arm as he moved toward the door just briefly, the lightest pressure, and it stopped him. He's going to try to get to the horses, she said quietly. That's what he's working toward. If something happens to your stock, you won't be able to run the ranch. You'll be forced to consider his offer. He looked at her. I know, he said. Sleep in the barn tonight, she said. It wasn't a request. It was said the way she said everything that mattered plainly, with the directness of a woman who had learned that softening things didn't protect them. I was already planning to, he said. She let go of his arm. He went out. She stood in the doorway and watched him go, and then she turned back to the table and the stack of papers that was slowly, carefully becoming the shape of the truth. The kind of truth that could stand up in front of a federal judge and not flinch. She sat down. She picked up her pen. She thought about what Ethan had said to Victor Caldwell in the middle of the street with half the town watching. She's not a stranger anymore. She pressed the tip of the pen to the page and began to write. The night passed without incident. The horses were safe. But in the morning, a boy came out from town with a message. He was maybe 12, freckled, and he had the look of someone who didn't know what was in the envelope he was carrying, but had picked up from the adults around him that it was something serious. Ethan took the envelope, and the boy left quickly. He opened it at the kitchen table with Clara and Pete both present. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the county letterhead at the top. It was a notice of formal complaint. Filed against Clara Bennett, resident of the Whitaker Ranch property, for violation of her pending theft charge by leaving county jurisdiction. The notice required her appearance before Judge Harlan in Harlan Creek within 7 days. The room went very quiet. Clara picked up the paper. She read it through once, twice, and then set it back on the table. Her face was composed, but her hand, when she set the paper down, pressed flat against the table and stayed there, and Ethan could see the small tremor in her fingers that she was working to keep out of her expression. "He's moving to remove me," she said. 7 days, Pete said. "If I appear before Harlan, he'll find grounds to detain me," Clara said. "It doesn't matter what I say or what I bring. Harlan is Caldwell's." She looked at Ethan. "And if I don't appear, I'm in violation of the notice which gives him cause to have me removed by force." Ethan looked at the notice. "Garrison gets here in 9 days, he said. 2 days after I'm required to appear," Clara said. "That's not an accident." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not." He looked at her across the table. "We're not sending you to Harlan," he said. "Ethan." "We're not," he said. "We're going to send a formal response contesting the jurisdiction of the notice on the grounds that the underlying charge is itself under active investigation for fraudulent filing." He looked at Pete. "Sutter. I need to talk to Sutter again today. Sutter has no authority to override Harlan. No. But he can certify the documentation we already have, which means when Garrison arrives, there's already a record that this complaint was contested through proper channels." He looked at Clara. "If Harlan tries to move on you before Garrison gets here, we're not fighting it in Harlan Creek. We're filing for a federal stay." She stared at him. "How do you know how to do that?" she asked. A pause. "Eleanor's brother is a lawyer," he said, "in Helena. He's not as close as Garrison, but he's a federal practitioner." His voice was steady. "I wrote to him the same night I wrote to Garrison. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure he'd respond." "And did he?" Ethan reached into his vest pocket and set a second letter on the table. Clara looked at it, then at him. "You've been planning for 2 contingencies," she said. "I've been planning for 5, he said. "Caldwell is smart, but he's never had anyone actually plan against him before because everyone he's done this to has been alone." He held her gaze. "You're not alone." The tremor in her hand stilled. She picked up the letter from Helena and read it. When she set it down, her eyes were dry, but there was something in them that hadn't been there before. Something that was not quite hope, but was the place where hope grows from. "All right," she said quietly. "All right," he said. He reached for his hat. "Pete," he said, standing, "ride to Sutter this morning. Tell him I need him to certify and date the documents we gave him. Tell him it's urgent." He looked at Clara. "Can you draft the formal contest to the notice in legal language? You know more about that than I do." "Yes," she said, already pulling paper toward her. "I'm going to ride the fence line and make sure nothing else has been cut," he said. "And then I'm going to come back and we're going to have everything ready." He picked up his hat. At the door he stopped. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried clearly back into the kitchen. "Clara," he said. "Yes. He's not going to win this." A pause. "No," she said. "He's not." I went out into the morning. The dry, hard Montana summer morning, and the door closed behind him, and Clara sat at the table with the sound of his boots fading across the porch and the yard, and she thought 3 years. 3 years of running, of sleeping in rooms she didn't trust, of waking up in the middle of the night with her heart slamming because she'd heard a sound and couldn't tell if it was nothing or if it was the thing she feared most. She thought maybe this is where it ends. Not the running, the being alone. She pressed her pen to the page. She began to write. Garrison arrived on the 8th day, not the 9th. He was a lean man in his mid-40s, with a lawyer's economy of movement and a traveler's dust on his coat, and he walked through Ethan's front door, set his bag on the floor, looked at the papers spread across the kitchen table, and said without preamble, "Show me everything." Clara showed him everything. She walked him through it for 2 hours straight. The reconstructed account records, Amos Pruitt's testimony, the fake assessor's name, and its connection to Caldwell's payroll, Sutter's certified documentation of the fraudulent filing, the formal contest they'd already submitted to the county. Notice the letter from Ethan's brother-in-law in Helena, outlining the grounds for a federal stay. She laid it out in order cleanly, without editorializing the way she'd kept books precise and irrefutable. Garrison listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at her for a moment. "Where did you learn to build a legal case?" he asked. "I didn't," she said. "I learned to keep accurate records. The case built itself." He looked at Ethan. "She's right," he said. "This is solid, not complete but solid." He tapped the stack of papers. "The weakest point is the connection between the fake assessor and Caldwell's direct involvement. We have payments. We have the name. But Caldwell's lawyers will argue the land company operated independently, and he had no knowledge of the fraudulent filings. He came to me personally on the main street of Harlan Creek and offered to buy my land at below market value," Ethan said. "2 days after that assessment was filed without my notification." "I know," Garrison said. "And a good judge will see what that means. But we need something more direct." He looked at Clara. "You said the payments to this man tripled in the 6 months before you left. Do you remember the specific amounts?" "Yes," she said. "Write them down. Every figure you remember, with whatever context you have, dates, if you recall them, what the corresponding land transfers were, if you can connect them." He pulled a clean sheet of paper from his bag and set it in front of her. "The more specific the numbers, the harder it is to claim coincidence." She picked up the pen. "I'll have it done in an hour," she said. Garrison looked at Ethan. "The notice requiring her appearance before Harlan. Has there been a response to your contest?" "Not yet." "We're at day 5 of 7, Garrison said. "I know. If Harlan rules on the notice before we can get the federal stay filed, then we need to file the stay today," Ethan said. Garrison nodded once decisively. "Write up what you need me to sign," he said. "We'll get it to Helena by tonight's stage." The kitchen turned into something that felt like a command post. Papers moving, pens scratching, Garrison dictating language to Ethan, while Clara wrote figures from memory with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something. Pete came in and out carrying messages, keeping water hot, asking no unnecessary questions. By mid-afternoon, the federal stay application was ready to go. By evening, it was on the stage to Helena. 2 days later, Judge Harlan ruled against the contest. The letter came on a Tuesday, delivered by a county deputy, who handed it to Pete at the gate, with the expression of a man who was doing a job he wasn't comfortable with. Pete brought it inside without opening it. He set it on the table in front of Ethan without a word. Ethan read it. He handed it to Garrison. Garrison read it and set it down. "He's ordering her appearance tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," Ethan said. "Not a question. By noon." Garrison's voice was level. "He's moved the deadline up. He can do that under county emergency provisions, which means someone told him we'd filed a contest, and he's trying to get her in front of him before the federal stay can be processed." Clara stood at the far end of the table. She'd read the letter over Garrison's shoulder. Her face was pale but composed, and she had her hands linked in front of her, which was the thing she did when she was holding herself very still against something. "How long for the stay?" she asked. "The application went out 2 days ago," Garrison said. "Helena takes 3 to 5 days for federal processing. So at minimum 1 more day," she said. "Possibly 3. "Yes." She nodded slowly. She looked at the letter again. If I don't appear, she said, he issues a warrant. Yes. And if I do appear, he detains me on the original charge. Almost certainly. So either way he wins this move, she said. The room was quiet. Then Ethan said, unless we change the terms of the move. Everyone looked at him. Harlan expects her to either appear alone or not appear at all, he said. He's not expecting us to walk into that courtroom with a lawyer, a certified record of fraud filed with the county registrar, and a federal stay application already in transit. He looked at Garrison. Can we appear and simultaneously challenge the court's jurisdiction? Garrison was already nodding slowly. We can. It's not a guarantee Harlan can override the challenge in his own court. But it creates a record. Every ruling he makes after that challenge is on paper, and if the stay comes through, those rulings are reviewable. He paused. It also makes it very difficult for him to detain her without cause. Detaining a woman who is actively contesting the legitimacy of the charge in a courtroom with legal representation and documented evidence of fraud, that's the kind of thing that ends a judge's career when it comes out. He knows that, Clara said. Yes, Garrison agreed. Which means he might back down rather than risk it. Or he might not, Clara said. Or he might not. Garrison agreed. Caldwell might have promised him enough that he's willing to take the risk. Another silence. Clara looked at Ethan. If we go into that courtroom tomorrow, she said quietly, and it goes wrong, you lose everything. This ranch, your reputation, everything you've built here. I know, he said. Ethan. Clara. His voice was even and unhurried. I know. I've known since day one what the stakes were, so have you. He held her gaze. Are you ready to walk into that room? She stood very still. 3 years of running crossed her face in a second. Every town, every locked door, every morning she'd woken up and had to remember all over again what she'd lost. And then something else crossed it. Something that had been growing quietly over the past 3 weeks on a ranch in eastern Montana. Something that looked like the opposite of running. Yes, she said. Then we go tomorrow, he said. They rode into Harlan Creek the next morning, all 4 of them. Ethan, Clara, Garrison, and Pete, who had decided without being asked that he was coming, and had said so in a tone that ended the conversation before it started. The town noticed. You couldn't ride 4 across down the main street without the town noticing, and Harlan Creek was a town that had been watching this situation with the particular hunger of people who needed something to land on one side or the other. Ethan rode like a man who owned the road under his horse's feet. He didn't look at the people on the boardwalks. He didn't need to. Clara rode beside him. Her back was straight, and her chin was level, and she looked forward, not down, and anyone watching who had any capacity for reading people would have understood immediately that whatever this woman was, she was not what Victor Caldwell had said she was. They tied the horses at the post outside the county building and went in. The courtroom was small and smelled of wood and old paper. There were perhaps 15 people already in the seats. Townspeople who'd heard enough to know something was happening today and wanted to see what it was. Ethan recognized most of them. Some held his gaze and looked away. A few didn't look away. Amos Pruitt was sitting in the 3rd row. Ethan hadn't told him to come. He looked at Pete, who gave the smallest possible shrug that meant he might have said something when he'd gone to talk to Amos. Ethan looked at Amos. Amos gave him a short nod. They sat at the respondents' table. Garrison laid his papers out with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had been in worse courtrooms than this one and had walked out the other side. At the other table, the complainant's table, there was a county lawyer named Briggs that Ethan had seen before but didn't know well. The chair beside him was empty. For now. Judge Harlan came in at 10 past noon. He was a big man, white-haired with the particular authority of someone who had been unchallenged for long enough that he'd forgotten what challenge looked like. He sat down, looked at the room, and then looked at the respondent's table, and his eyes paused briefly on Garrison. He hadn't expected a lawyer. Ethan could see that. Miss Bennett, Harlan said. His voice was formally courteous, in the way of men who don't need to raise their voices because they've never had to. You've appeared in response to the county notice. That's acknowledged. Garrison stood up before Clara could respond. Your Honor, I'm James Garrison, representing Miss Bennett. Before these proceedings continue, I'm filing a formal challenge to this court's jurisdiction in this matter on the following grounds. He set a document on the judge's desk. The underlying charge against my client was filed under circumstances that are currently under investigation for fraudulent origination. Additionally, a federal stay application is presently in transit to Helena in connection with related property fraud matters that directly involve the parties initiating this complaint. He set a second document beside the first. I have certified documentation from County Registrar Sutter confirming active discrepancies in filed county assessments connected to this case. The courtroom was very quiet. Harlan looked at the documents. He didn't touch them. Mr. Garrison, he said in a tone of judicial patience that had ice under it. A challenge to jurisdiction does not halt these proceedings. No, Your Honor, it doesn't. Garrison agreed pleasantly. But any ruling made after this challenge is entered into the record is reviewable by the Federal Circuit Court once the stay application is processed. I want to make certain the court understands that. A beat. Harlan looked at Garrison for a long moment. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and Victor Caldwell walked in. He didn't sit in the gallery. He walked to the complainant's table and sat beside Briggs, and he did it with the ease of a man who had every right to be exactly where he was. He straightened his coat. He turned his ring on his finger. He looked at Clara. She looked back at him without flinching. His gaze moved to Ethan. Something passed between them. Not anger, not threat. Something colder and more patient than either of those things. Then Harlan said, Mr. Caldwell, as the complainant in this matter, Your Honor. Garrison again, still standing. Victor Caldwell's presence at the complainant's table raises a significant conflict of interest, given that he is named in the federal investigation currently underway. There is no federal investigation currently underway, Caldwell said smoothly. He didn't raise his voice. There is an application which has not been approved and which is based on fabricated allegations made by a woman facing a theft charge. He looked at Harlan. I'd like to proceed. Harlan nodded. Garrison sat down. Ethan leaned slightly toward him. That's it, he said low. For now, Garrison said quietly. I've laid the groundwork. Now we watch. What followed was 40 minutes of procedural maneuvering that Ethan didn't fully understand, but Garrison tracked with the calm focus of someone reading a map. Harlan asked questions. Briggs presented the county notice and the original theft charge and the documentation of Clara's alleged departure from jurisdiction. Garrison objected to the departure framing she had left Harlan Creek before the charge was formally served, which meant she'd never legally been within the notice's jurisdiction to begin with. Harlan overruled. Garrison noted the overruling for the record without a change in expression. Clara sat with her hands folded on the table perfectly still. Not performing composure. Actually composed in the way of someone who has made a decision and is living inside it without second-guessing. Ethan sat beside her. He didn't speak. He was there the way a wall is there, not actively doing anything but between her and what was coming. And then Harlan said, given the documented violation of the notice terms, I'm inclined to... The back door of the courtroom opened. Everyone turned. A young man came in, a courier dust on his boots, an envelope in his hand. He walked to the front of the room with the single-mindedness of someone who had been told this was urgent and had taken that seriously. He handed the envelope to Garrison. Garrison opened it. He read it. And Ethan, who had been watching Garrison's face for 40 minutes and learned how to read the small movements of it, saw something change. Garrison stood up. Your Honor, he said, I've just received a federal communication. He held up the envelope. The stay application filed with the Helena Circuit Court has been granted on an emergency basis. He set the document on the judge's bench. All county proceedings related to this matter are hereby suspended pending federal review. The courtroom erupted. Not loudly, it was too stunned for loud. More like a room full of people exhaling at the same time. Harlan stared at the document. Caldwell was very, very still. Clara turned to look at Ethan. He was already looking at her. Something passed between them that was not relief. Not yet relief would come later, when there was room for it. What passed between them now was something quieter and more certain. Something that said, "We knew it would come." Harlan read the stay order. His face did nothing that Ethan could interpret. He set it down. "These proceedings are suspended," he said. His voice was level. Whatever he was feeling, he was keeping it off his face. "Pending federal review. Miss Bennett, you are released from the terms of the county notice for the duration of the stay." He picked up his gavel. "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. The room began to move and breathe. Outside on the steps of the county building, Ethan stood in the afternoon heat and let himself breathe. Garrison was beside him, folding the stay order with the calm of a man who had learned never to show too much until he was certain it was warranted. "That was closer than I'd like," he said. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "The stay buys us time. It doesn't resolve anything." He looked at Ethan. "We still need to build the full case. The stay keeps Harlan from moving against Clara, but Caldwell can still pursue the land fraud through the county assessor's process. We need the federal investigation to formally open, and for that we need more than we have." "We have Pruitt," Ethan said. "We need 2 more, Garrison said. "At minimum, 2 more property owners who can testify to the same pattern." Ethan looked out at the street. "There are more," he said. "I know there are more. I just need to find them." "Then find them," Garrison said simply. He tucked the documents under his arm. "You have time now. Use it." He went back inside to collect the rest of his papers. Ethan stood alone on the steps. Clara came out through the door and stood beside him. She didn't say anything for a moment. She stood in the afternoon heat with her arms at her sides and her face turned slightly toward the street, and she looked like a woman who had just come through something and was taking stock of whether she was still in one piece. "Garrison says we need more testimonies," Ethan said. "I heard," she said. "I think there are ranchers on the south side of the county." "Ethan!" She said it quietly, not to stop him, just to pause him. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Not the way she'd said it before, carefully as a transaction. She said it the way you say something when it's the only true thing available. He held her gaze. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We haven't won." "No," she said. "But we didn't lose today. And for the first time in 3 years, that means something different than it used to." He understood what she meant. He understood it more than she probably knew. "Come on," he said. "Let's find Pete and get back to the ranch. We have work to do." That evening, after Garrison had gone to sleep in the back room and Pete had turned in, Ethan and Clara sat at the kitchen table one more time with the lamp between them and the list of names Ethan had started ranchers on the south side. Smaller operations, the kind of men Caldwell had been picking off one by one because no one had ever asked them to stand together. Clara was writing. Ethan was thinking. "Caldwell was very calm in there," Clara said without looking up. "He's been calm through all of it," Ethan said. "That bothers me more than if he'd been angry." She set down her pen. "An angry man reacts. A calm man plans." She looked at him. "He's going to do something we haven't anticipated." "What makes you think so?" "Because he's been 3 steps ahead of everyone who's ever come up against him, and he didn't get that way by panicking when a plan hit an obstacle." She folded her hands on the table. "The stay slowed him down. It didn't stop him. He's going to come at this from a direction we haven't prepared for." Ethan looked at her steadily. "What direction?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said slowly, "He can't get to you through the legal system right now. He can't get to me through the county notice." She paused. "So he's going to go after what he can actually reach." "The horses," Ethan said. "Or Pete," she said. "Or Garrison. Or Amos Pruitt." She met his eyes. "He needs to collapse the case before the federal investigation formally opens. The fastest way to do that is to eliminate the witnesses." The word eliminate sat on the table between them. "You think he'd go that far?" Ethan said. She looked at him without blinking. "I think he already did," she said. "I think the reason the last person who worked in those accounts before me left so suddenly with no explanation and no forwarding address had nothing to do with choosing to leave. A silence that had a different weight than the ones before it. "Do you have a name?" Ethan asked. "Margaret Hollis," Clara said. "She was in those accounts before me. 18 months before me. She left in the winter of 1880, and no one seemed to know where she went." She held his gaze. "I asked about her once in my first week. One of the housemaids told me not to ask about Margaret." She paused, and then looked over her shoulder. Ethan stood up from the table. I went to the window and stood with his back to her, his hands braced on either side of the frame, and she could see the line of his shoulders and the way they had gone rigid. "If he hurt that woman," he started. "If he did, we can't prove it," Clara said quietly. "Not now. Not without more than what we have." She paused. "But it's why he has to win, Ethan. Do you understand? It's not just about the land. If a full federal investigation opens and people start looking at everything, the accounts, the properties, the people who disappeared, it's not fraud anymore. It's something much worse." He turned around. His face was very controlled, but his eyes were the eyes of a man who has just understood the full size of what he's standing against. "We need to warn Amos Pruitt," he said. "Tonight," she said. "And Garrison needs to know about Margaret Hollis." "Yes." She was already pulling a fresh sheet of paper toward her. "I'll write down everything I remember about her, every detail." He went for his hat and his coat. "I'm going to Pruitt's tonight," he said. "Don't argue with me about it." She looked up. "I wasn't going to argue with you," she said. "I was going to tell you to take your rifle." He paused at the door. He looked back at her at the lamp-lit kitchen, and the woman sitting in it writing with fierce, careful precision, her face intent and her pen moving fast, building the truth one word at a time. "Lock the door after me," he said. "I always do," she said. He went out into the dark. Pruitt's place was 40 minutes by horse. Ethan rode fast and without a lamp, trusting his horse to know the road. He found Amos on his porch, which told him something: a man doesn't sit on his porch after dark in a Montana summer, unless something is keeping him from sleep. Amos stood up when he heard hoofbeats and had his hand near his hip before he recognized Ethan and let it fall. "Whitaker," he said. "Hell of a time for a visit." "I need you to listen to me," Ethan said. He didn't dismount. "We won the stay today, but Caldwell's going to move against the witnesses. That means you." Amos stood very still. "Move against me how?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Ethan said. "But I need you to not be alone for the next few days. Is there family you can stay with?" Amos was quiet for a moment. "My sister over in Copper Ridge," he said. "Go tomorrow," Ethan said. "First thing. Don't tell anyone in town where you're going." Amos looked at him. "It's that bad," he said. "It could be," Ethan said. "I'm not going to lie to you about it." Another silence. Amos looked out at his empty fields, the land he'd been pushed off the fields he no longer owned. When he looked back at Ethan, something had hardened in his face. "I'm going to testify," he said. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that. I don't care what Caldwell does. I'm going to stand up and say what he did to me." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I need you alive to do it." He wheeled his horse. "Go to your sister. I'll get word to you when it's safe." He rode back hard. I was still a quarter-mile from the ranch when he saw it. Light. The wrong kind of light, not the steady glow of a lamp in a window, but something moving, flickering with the particular orange quality that meant wood catching fire. His stomach turned to stone. He pushed his horse to a full run. He came through the gate and saw it immediately, the corner of the barn. Not the whole structure, not yet. A section of dry wood siding catching climbing. The horses inside were screaming. I was off the horse before it had fully stopped. Clara was already there. She was at the barn door hauling it open, and the heat rolled out at her, and she didn't step back. She went in. He went in after her. The horses were in full panic, kicking, wheeling, the whites of their eyes showing in the firelight. He went to Duchess first because she was closest, and because Clara had been with her and would have a better chance of controlling her. He got the rope on and pulled her toward the door, and Clara was right behind him with the second horse, and then Pete. Pete was there, coming from the bunkhouse in his long underwear, with his boots barely on, and together the three of them got all 14 horses out of the barn and into the south pasture before the fire reached the hayloft. Then Pete grabbed 2 buckets and Ethan grabbed 2 more, and they ran the water line from the pump while Clara opened the irrigation ditch that fed the kitchen garden and diverted what flow she could toward the barn wall. It took 40 minutes to put it down. 40 minutes of heat and smoke and burning hands, and not thinking, only moving, only doing the next thing and the next thing and the next. When it was done, the corner of the barn was gone, a section of wall, part of the roof beam, a stretch of siding. The rest had held. The horses were safe. Ethan stood in the yard with his hands burned and his coat smelling of smoke and looked at the damage. Pete stood beside him. "You were gone," Pete said. "Whoever did this knew you were gone." "They were watching," Ethan said. "Yes." Clara came and stood on his other side. She was breathing hard, and her dress had a scorch mark on the sleeve, and her hair had come completely loose. She looked at the damaged barn wall, and her jaw was set. "Garrison needs to know about this tonight," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "And it needs to be documented before anything is touched. Location of the ignition point. What accelerant was used, if we can tell?" She was already thinking, already building. "This is not vandalism anymore. This is arson. That's a federal offense. That goes into the record." Ethan looked at her. Her face was soot-streaked and intent, and she had not, he noticed, said a single word about being afraid. She had gone into a burning barn without hesitating. She had stayed at the pump until the fire was out. And now she was already turning the attack into evidence, the way she turned everything with her mind, with her relentless precision, with the particular courage of someone who has decided not to run. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. The words were not ones he'd planned. They came out because the moment required them, and because he had stopped somewhere in the last 40 minutes, being able to hold them back. "When this is over," he said, "I'd like you to stay." She looked at him for a long moment. The firelight was dying down. Pete had gone to check on the horses. The yard was quiet except for the distant sound of the herd settling. "Is that—" she started, then stopped. Tried again. "Ethan, you should think carefully about what you're saying." "I have been thinking carefully," he said. "For 3 weeks. This is what careful thinking produces." She was very still. "I'm not the woman I was before all of this," she said quietly. "I don't know yet who I'm going to be when it's done." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for who you were or who you'll be. I'm asking for the woman standing in my yard right now." Something moved across her face that she couldn't quite contain. Not quite crying, not quite smiling, something that lived between those two things, in the place where people go when they're suddenly, unexpectedly, not alone anymore. "Ask me again," she said softly, "when it's over." "All right," he said. He meant it. He wasn't going anywhere, and she knew it. She looked back at the damaged barn. "Now," she said in a voice that was almost steady, "let's go wake up Garrison." She walked toward the house. He walked beside her. And in the morning, what had happened in his yard would become evidence. What Caldwell had sent against them would become another stone in the case being built against him, piece by careful piece, in the light of a ranch kitchen where 2 people had stopped running from opposite directions and found themselves standing in the same place. But that was morning. Tonight they walked through the dark side by side, close enough that their arms almost touched, and did not say another word, and did not need to. Garrison was at the kitchen table before sunrise. He hadn't slept much. None of them had, and he had the focused, slightly hollow look of a man running on coffee and urgency. He'd walked the barn site in the dark with a lamp, noted the ignition point, documented the scorch pattern, and come back inside with mud on his boots and something sharp in his eyes. He set his notes on the table. "Accelerant," he said. "Someone poured something along the base of the east wall. You can smell it even now. That's not an accident, and it's not a spark from a lamp." He looked at Ethan. "This is arson. Deliberate, targeted, executed while you were away from the property." He tapped his notes. "And it happened within 24 hours of the stay being granted." "He's telling us he's not afraid of the stay," Clara said. "He's telling us he's not afraid of anything," Garrison corrected. "Which means he either has something we don't know about, or he's panicking and hiding it well. He looked between them. Either way, this goes into the federal filing today. Arson in connection with an ongoing federal fraud investigation elevates the entire case. It changes what the circuit court is looking at. How fast can you file it? Ethan asked. I can have the addendum written by mid-morning, Garrison said. But I need a witness who can testify to the state of the barn before the fire. Someone other than the three of you. Pete appeared in the doorway with his coffee. Walt Briggs from town was out here 2 weeks ago, he said. He saw the barn whole. He's been nervous about Caldwell for a while. His brother-in-law lost land in the South Valley last year. He looked at Ethan. I think he might be ready to say something. Ethan and Garrison exchanged a look. That's 2 more potential witnesses, Ethan said. Briggs and his brother-in-law. Get them, Garrison said simply. I'll go this morning, Pete said. He finished his coffee and went. Clara spent that morning writing. Not the account figures this time. She had given those to Garrison in full, and he had them documented. What she was writing now was something different, something that had kept her awake longer than the fire had, lying on her side in the small back room, listening to the ranch settle around her and thinking about a woman named Margaret Hollis. She wrote everything she could remember. Every detail from those 8 months in the Caldwell household, the way Margaret's name had been avoided, the look on the housemaid's face when Clara had asked about her, the single comment she'd overheard once between 2 of Caldwell's men in the hall outside the study. She hadn't understood it at the time. She understood it now. They'd said the last one who asked too many questions isn't asking anything anymore. She had written it down, verbatim, exactly as she remembered it, with the names of the 2 men who had said it. She brought it to Garrison. He read it. He read it a second time. He set it down. You're certain of the exact wording, he said. I have a precise memory, she said. It's the thing that saved my life in those accounts. It's the thing that may have made me a target. But yes, I am certain. Garrison looked at the names she'd written. These men, do you know if they're still in Caldwell's employ? As of 8 months ago, yes, she said. Whether they still are? If they are, they're witnesses, he said. If they're not, they may be willing to talk. He looked up at her. This changes things, Clara. If Caldwell is connected to the disappearance of a previous employee, we're not talking about property fraud anymore. I know, she said. A federal investigator will need to look for Margaret Hollis, he said. Find out what happened to her, and if what happened to her is what I think you're implying. Then Victor Caldwell is not going to federal court on fraud charges, Clara said. He's going on something else entirely. The kitchen was very quiet. From outside, they could hear Ethan working on the damaged barn. The sound of boards being assessed, nails pulled from scorched wood, the ordinary sounds of a man repairing what had been broken. Clara looked toward the window. He doesn't know about Margaret yet, she said. Tell him today, Garrison said. He needs to know what we're actually dealing with. She told him at noon while he was eating, standing up at the kitchen counter because he hadn't wanted to stop working long enough to sit down. She laid it out directly the way she always did. The overheard conversation, the names, what she believed it meant. She watched his face as she spoke. She had learned to read him over these weeks, the particular stillness that came over him when something mattered, the way his jaw set when he was controlling a reaction. He set down his food. Howe was quiet for a long moment. You've been carrying this since before you got here, he said. I didn't know what it meant for certain, she said. I still don't, not for certain, but yes. He looked at her steadily. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was afraid, she said. Not of you. Of what it would mean to say it out loud. If I say it out loud, it becomes real. And if it's real... She stopped. If it's real, you could have been next, he said. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. He looked at the counter, then back at her. You came to my gate anyway, he said. I had nowhere else to go, she said. That's not the only reason, he said quietly. She didn't answer that, but she didn't deny it. Garrison says the federal investigator will look for her, she said. For Margaret. Good, he said. The word had an edge to it, the particular edge of a man who has decided what something means and what it requires of him. And those two men, the ones who said what they said in the hallway. Can you identify them well enough for someone to find them? Yes, she said. One of them had a scar through his left eyebrow. The other walked with a limp from an old injury he favored his right leg. Ethan looked at her. You notice everything, he said. I had to, she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. Then, go help Garrison. I'll finish the barn. She turned to go. Clara. His voice stopped her. She looked back. I'm glad you came through that gate, he said. She stood in the doorway for one moment. So am I, she said, and went inside. Pete came back from town in the early afternoon. He came back with Walt Briggs. Briggs was a square-built man in his 50s, with a weathered face and the look of someone who had been thinking something over for a long time and had finally made up his mind. He shook Ethan's hand and sat down at the kitchen table and said without being asked, My brother-in-law's name is Thomas Hale. He had 40 acres on the South Ridge. He sold them for 30 cents on the dollar because the assessment came in wrong and he didn't know he could contest it. He folded his hands on the table. I've been angry about it since it happened. I just didn't know what to do with the anger. You can do something with it now, Garrison said. Briggs looked at the papers on the table. What do you need? He asked. A sworn statement, Garrison said. What you know, what you witnessed, what your brother-in-law told you directly. And if Hale is willing to testify in person, that would be considerably better. He's willing, Briggs said. I asked him before I came. He paused. There are others too. I know of at least 3 more families in the South Valley who got the same treatment. Small operations, nobody with money to fight. Caldwell's been running this county like a... He stopped, looked for the word settled on, like a man who knows nobody's watching him. Someone's watching now, Ethan said. Briggs looked at him. Is it going to be enough? He asked. Garrison answered before Ethan could. It's going to be more than enough, he said. That evening, something shifted in Harlan Creek. Ethan felt it when he rode in for supplies the next morning. The same main street, the same storefronts, but something different in the quality of the attention he received. Less avoidance, more direct looks. A woman he barely knew nodded to him from the post office steps. The man at the hardware store who'd looked away 3 days ago held the door for him. Word was moving through the town. He couldn't have said exactly what word people rarely transmitted information. Cleanly, it always arrived changed and partial, but the shape of what was moving was clear enough. People knew the federal government was involved. People knew there had been a fire. People knew that Ethan Whitaker had gone into that courtroom with a lawyer and come out with his case intact, and that the woman everyone had been told was a thief had sat at that table with her back straight and let a federal lawyer speak for her and not looked like a thief even slightly. The town was reconsidering. Quietly, carefully, the way towns do when they realize they may have been used. At the feed store, a man named Garrett, who had spoken against Clara at the very beginning, stopped Ethan in the doorway. I heard about the fire, Garrett said. He looked uncomfortable, which was honest. Yes, Ethan said. Garrett stopped. That's not right. Whatever anyone says about that woman burning a man's barn out from under him while he's away, that's not right. Ethan looked at him. No, he said. It's not. Garrett looked down at his boots briefly. She's been treated poorly, he said. That much I'll say. Ethan didn't respond to that directly. He didn't need to. My wife makes a good pot of preserves, Garrett said abruptly. If Miss Bennett would accept them. He searched for the word. I'll tell her, Ethan said. He went in and got his supplies and rode home. He told Clara about it at dinner. He said it plainly without making it bigger than it was. She was quiet for a moment. Preserves, she said. Apparently so. She looked at her plate. When she looked up, her eyes were slightly brighter than usual, though she didn't do anything about it. That's a strange thing to be undone by, she said. Human beings are strange, he said. She almost smiled. Yes, she said. We are. 3 days later, the federal investigator arrived. His name was Cole, and he was a compact, methodical man from the Helena office who spoke in precise sentences and wasted nothing. He sat up at the kitchen table, which had become over the past weeks a kind of operations center, and went through everything Garrison had compiled with the thoroughness of someone who was going to have to stand in front of a federal judge and account for every detail. He questioned Clara for 4 hours, not harshly professionally, which was its own kind of thorough. He asked her to walk through the accounts 3 times. He asked about Margaret Hollis twice in different ways, listening for consistency. He asked about the overheard conversation, the 2 men, the timing of her departure. Clara answered everything directly. She didn't embroider and she didn't deflect, and by the end of the 4 hours, the investigator had the look of a man who had expected to have to work harder to determine whether a witness was credible. He questioned Ethan afterward separately. He questioned Pete. He questioned Amos Pruitt, whom Pete had brought back from his sister's place in Copper Ridge for the purpose. He questioned Walt Briggs. He took sworn statements. And then on the second day, he did something none of them had anticipated. He went to see Sutter. He came back 3 hours later with a box. Not a large box the size of a document case battered at the corners with a county registrar's seal on the front. He set it on the table. Sutter has been keeping a separate record, he said. For 2 years. Every assessment that came through his office that he believed was irregular. He didn't have the authority to act on them himself. He didn't have enough to take to the sheriff, who he already suspected of being in Caldwell's pocket. Cole looked at the box, but he kept copies. No one in the room spoke for a moment. "How many?" Garrison asked finally. Cole opened the box. There were 11 separate property files inside, 11 families, 11 fraudulent assessments, 11 illegal transfers, all executed through the same fake assessor's name, all connected by the same pattern of payments that Clara had reconstructed from memory. She reached out and touched the edge of one of the files. She didn't open it. 11 families, she said quietly. At minimum, Cole said. These are the ones we can document with the physical records. There may be more. Ethan looked at the box. He thought about Amos Pruitt sitting on his porch in the dark because something was keeping him from sleep. He thought about Thomas Hale's 40 acres sold for 30 cents on the dollar. He thought about the small operations on the South Ridge, the people without money to fight. "He's been doing this for years," Pete said from the doorway. His voice was flat with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but was somewhere in the territory between them. "Yes," Cole said. And he believed he was untouchable. Because he had the county legal system, he had the judge, and he had a very effective method of silencing anyone who got close to the truth. He looked at Clara. Until someone was precise enough and stubborn enough to survive long enough to start building it from memory. Clara looked at the box of files. "What happens now?" she asked. "We file for a formal federal indictment," Cole said. "Based on what we have 11 documented cases, 1 witness to fraudulent account activity, sworn testimony from 4 property owners, arson connected to an ongoing investigation, and potential evidence of the disappearance of a prior witness." He paused. "That's enough. It's more than enough." "How long?" Ethan asked. "Filing takes a week. Indictment process takes another 2 to 3 weeks. Cole looked at him. "And then it's out of your hands and in the courts." A week, 2 to 3 weeks after that. Ethan was doing the math not just in time, but in exposure, in the gap between now and the moment the court took hold of this, and Caldwell lost the ability to reach them through informal means. "He's going to try something before the indictment," Ethan said. "Almost certainly," Cole said. He said it without alarm, the way a man says something he's already planned around. "What are we doing about that?" Ethan asked. Cole looked at him steadily. "Between now and the filing, you're going to have a federal presence on this property," he said. "Myself and 1 other officer. We're not here to guard you. We're here to document any further interference." He paused. "If Caldwell acts against any witness or any piece of evidence between now and the filing, he adds obstruction of federal process to his charges. And that," he paused, "that puts him in a federal penitentiary instead of a county court." "Does he know that?" Clara asked. "His lawyers do," Cole said. "Which means he knows it." He closed the document box. The question is whether he's smart enough to stop now that the cost has gotten high enough. He's not the kind of man who stops, Clara said quietly. Everyone looked at her. He's the kind of man who doubles down, she said. Every time someone should have pushed back, they didn't, and he got a little more certain that nothing could touch him. She looked at Cole. He doesn't know how to read a situation that isn't going his way. He's never had to learn. Cole studied her for a moment. Then we'd better be ready for whatever he decides to do, he said. He decided faster than any of them expected. It was 2 days after Cole's arrival, and it came not as a threat or an act of property damage, but as something Ethan hadn't thought to anticipate. It came in the form of a woman. She arrived at the ranch on a Wednesday morning, and she wasn't a stranger. She was Mrs. Alderton, who ran the church auxiliary, and had strong opinions about propriety and stronger ones about her own position as the moral authority of Harlan Creek's social fabric. She came in a good dress and with a card in her hand and asked to speak to Clara alone. Ethan was in the barn when she arrived, and Pete let her in and came to get him. Ethan took one look at Pete's expression and went to the house. He found Mrs. Alderton sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded, and Clara sitting across from her with an expression that was completely neutral in the particular way Clara's face went neutral when she was holding something very tight. "Mr. Whitaker," Mrs. Alderton said without warmth. "I've come on behalf of several of the town's leading families. We've been concerned." "I'll hear it," Ethan said. He sat down beside Clara without asking permission. Mrs. Alderton looked at him, recalibrated slightly, and continued. "We've been concerned about the situation developing around this ranch," she said. "We want peace in this community. We appreciate that you've been generous toward Miss Bennett. But the presence of federal officers, the ongoing legal difficulties, the questions being raised." She paused delicately. "It's creating a great deal of disruption." "The disruption was created by fraud," Ethan said, "not by the people investigating it. Be that as it may." She set her card on the table. "Mr. Caldwell has made it known that he is prepared to withdraw all legal proceedings related to this matter. The county notice against Miss Bennett would be dropped. All property assessments would be reconsidered." She looked between them. "In exchange for the withdrawal of the federal complaint." The room was very still. Clara looked at the card on the table. Ethan looked at Mrs. Alderton. "Who sent you?" he asked. "I told you several of the town's leading." "Who sent you specifically?" he said. Not loudly, just clearly. Mrs. Alderton's composure held but only just. "Mr. Caldwell suggested that a community representative—" "He sent you to offer me a deal," Ethan said. "Through a churchwoman, so it looks like neighborly concern instead of the negotiation of a guilty man trying to stop a federal indictment." He stood up. "You can tell Victor Caldwell that the answer is no. And you can tell him that sending you here has been noted and will be included in the documentation as an attempt to interfere with federal witnesses." Mrs. Alderton rose. Her face had gone stiff. "Mr. Whitaker, I understand you feel strongly, but—" "Mrs. Alderton." Clara spoke for the first time. Quietly, without heat, but with a clarity that stopped the older woman mid-sentence. "There are 11 families in this county who lost their land to the man who sent you here. They didn't get a community representative to offer them a deal. They didn't get any choice at all." She held the woman's gaze. "I hope when this is over you'll think about that." Mrs. Alderton looked at Clara for a long moment. Something moved in her face that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite recognition, but was somewhere close to both. She picked up her card from the table. She left without another word. The door closed. Clara let out a slow breath. "He's scared," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "He is. Scared men are dangerous. I know." She looked at her hands for a moment, then she looked up. "But they're also sloppy. Sending her here, that was sloppy. He's used to his method working. He sends pressure and people fold. We didn't fold, and he doesn't have another method." Ethan went to find Cole. Cole agreed that it was sloppy. He also agreed it was the action of a man who was watching the walls close in and reaching for anything that might slow them. "He's going to try one more direct move," Cole said. Something bigger than the barn. Something meant to collapse the case entirely. He looked at Ethan. We need to be ready. How do we get ready for something we don't know the shape of? Ethan asked. You keep every witness safe, Cole said. You keep this documentation secure, and you trust that whatever he does, it goes into the record and makes the case stronger, not weaker. He paused. And you don't leave this ranch unattended. Ethan nodded. He went to find Clara. She was in the barn. She went there in the evenings now, the way he used to, when the day had been too much, and she needed to stand next to something honest. Duchess came to her when she entered the way. Good horses come to people they've decided about. He stood in the doorway. Cole thinks he's going to make a final move, he said. I think so too, she said. She was stroking Duchess's nose without looking at him. We're not going to be able to predict what it is, he said. No, she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. Are you frightened? He asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. Yes, she said. But I've been frightened before, and I kept moving anyway. She looked at him. That's all frightened means to me now. It means I keep moving. He stood in the doorway for another moment. I need to tell you something, he said. She turned to look at him. Whatever happens, he said, whatever he does, I need you to know that the last 3 weeks have been... He stopped, searched for the right word, landed somewhere honest. They've been the first 3 weeks in 4 years that this ranch has felt like something I built for a reason. She looked at him for a long time. The barn was quiet around them. Duchess breathed softly. Ethan, she said at last. Yes. Ask me again, she said. What you asked me in the yard the night of the fire. He held her gaze. Will you stay? He asked. She took one breath. Yes, she said. I'll stay. The word landed in the space between them with the weight of something that had been true for longer than either of them had said it. The final move came on a Friday. It didn't come in the form Ethan had expected. It didn't come to the ranch, and it didn't come as fire or violence or legal maneuvering. It came in the form of a confession. At 9 in the morning, one of Victor Caldwell's men, a man named Roy Sears, who had worked for him for 7 years, and who had walked with a limp from an old injury to his right leg, walked into the federal officer's temporary quarters in Harlan Creek and sat down. Cole told them about it that afternoon. He wants immunity, Cole said, in exchange for full testimony. Clara went very still. He's one of the 2 men, she said, from the hallway. Yes, Cole said. He knows what happened to Margaret Hollis. The kitchen was completely silent. Ethan looked at Clara. Her face was pale and composed, and she had her hands flat on the table, and she was breathing carefully, in-out measured. Is she? Clara started. She's alive, Cole said. She's in Wyoming. She left voluntarily. She was paid to leave and paid to stay quiet. Threatened into it, Sears says. But she's alive. Clara closed her eyes for a single moment. When she opened them, they were wet at the edges, but dry on her cheeks. She's alive, she said. Yes, Cole said. She nodded. Once, twice, like she was counting something. What does Sears's testimony give you? Ethan asked. Everything, Cole said flatly. He was present for the account manipulation. He delivered payments to the county office. He can name every property, every false assessor, filing every person who received money from Caldwell to keep quiet. He paused. And he can connect Caldwell directly to the decision to pay and threaten Margaret Hollis. He looked at Clara. And to the decision to have you charged. Clara looked at the table. I was afraid of me, she said softly. Not because I had proof, because I had a precise enough memory to build proof, and he knew it. She paused. He knew from the moment I asked about the discrepancies. Yes, Cole said. So everything that happened because you were good at your job, and he couldn't afford for anyone to be, Cole said. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. Ethan said nothing. He let her have the silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear, and her back was straight, and she looked like what she was, a woman who had been running from a lie for 3 years and had just watched the lie come apart at the foundation. When does the indictment file? She asked. Monday, Cole said. She nodded. Good, she said. Victor Caldwell was arrested on a Tuesday. Ethan heard about it in town. He was at the hardware store when the word came through, and he stood very still for a moment, holding a bag of nails, while the news settled through the room like water finding its level. He rode home. Clara was at the kitchen table when he came through the door. She looked up and read his face before he said a word. They got him, she said. Yesterday evening, he said. Federal marshals from Helena. He was taken into custody at his house. He sat down across from her. It's done. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She looked at them. It's done, she said, as if testing the words for weight. The charges include 12 counts of property fraud, 3 counts of filing false federal documents, 2 counts of witness intimidation and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. He paused. He's not going to walk away from this, Clara. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said very softly, Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the fear. It wasn't the running. It was that I started to believe him. I started to think, maybe I am what they say I am. Maybe this is all I'm going to be. She looked up. A woman who can't stay anywhere. A woman who gets people hurt just by being near them. And now, he asked. She looked at him across the table. Now I know that what I am is the person who brought him down, she said, with a ledger and a memory, and one man who let me through his gate. Ethan looked at her steadily. One man, he said, who is extremely glad he left that gate unlatched. Something broke through her face, then something full and unguarded. A smile that reached all the way up, the kind of smile that takes over a person's whole expression, when they finally, after a long time, allow themselves to feel something good. She laughed. Short and real and surprised the way she had laughed that first time in the kitchen weeks ago. But fuller now. Warmer. He sat across from her and let himself feel what he felt, which was something he hadn't done in 4 years, and which felt like most things worth feeling, both terrifying and necessary. Outside, Colt moved on the porch. The afternoon wind came through the window. In the south pasture, Duchess called out once, and then was quiet. The ranch held them both, and it was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The week after Victor Caldwell's arrest was the strangest week Ethan Whitaker had lived through since Eleanor died. Not because anything went wrong, because everything went quiet. After weeks of fires and legal notices and federal officers at the kitchen table and the constant low hum of threat. Underneath every ordinary moment, the quiet felt foreign. Like a sound he'd forgotten how to hear. He kept waking before dawn and lying in the dark, waiting for something. Hoofbeats, a knock. Pete's voice with bad news, and the silence kept giving him nothing to do with the readiness he'd built up like callus over the past month. Clara felt it too. He could tell by the way she moved through the first few days after the arrest, purposeful, but slightly unmoored, like a woman who had been navigating by a fixed point and had looked up to find it gone. She didn't stop working. That wasn't in her nature. She kept the accounts she wrote Duchess in the afternoons. She helped Pete repair the last of the barn damage with a practical competence that still surprised him. Sometimes even after weeks of watching her be competent at everything she attempted. But there was a quality to her movements in those first days that he recognized, because he'd had it himself, the careful, slightly disbelieving manner of someone who isn't yet certain the ground beneath them is real. On the 4th morning after the arrest, he found her on the porch before sunrise. She was sitting in the chair that had become by quiet mutual agreement hers. She had her coffee, and she was looking out at the pasture where the horses moved in the early dark, and she had the expression of someone engaged in a conversation with herself that hadn't reached a conclusion yet. He sat in his chair without saying anything. They sat together in the dark for a while. Then she said, I keep thinking about what comes next. What does come next? He asked. That's what I'm trying to work out. She wrapped both hands around her cup. For 3 years, what came next was always the same thing. Stay ahead of it. Keep moving. Don't let it catch you. She paused. And now it's caught. It's done. And I'm sitting on a porch in Montana watching horses I've learned to love, and I don't know what comes next because I haven't had a next before. He was quiet for a moment. "You said you'd stay," he said. "I know," she said. "Does that part still hold?" She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "That part still holds." A pause. "I'm just not sure what staying looks like. I've never done it before." He looked out at the pasture. "Neither have I," he said. "Not really. I built this place, and then I inhabited it like a man waiting for something to justify it." He turned to look at her. "I think maybe staying looks like figuring it out together." She held his gaze for a long moment. "That's either very wise or very naive," she said. "Probably both," he said. She almost smiled. Then she did smile fully and turned back to the horses. They sat together until the sky started to go from black to dark blue, to the particular color that meant morning was serious about arriving, and then they went in and made breakfast, and the day began. Garrison left on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the arrest. He came to say goodbye properly, shook Ethan's hand, told him the federal case was solid, and that his testimony, if required at trial, would be brief and straightforward. He looked at Clara for a moment before he spoke to her in the way of a man who wants to choose his words carefully. "You should know," he said, "that what you did here, the reconstruction, the documentation, the precision you brought to building this case. I've worked with trained lawyers who couldn't have done what you did with what you had." Clara looked at him steadily. "I had a good memory and a reason to use it," she said. "You had more than that," he said. "You had the clarity to stay calm when most people would have panicked, and the courage to keep adding to the record every single day, even when the outcome wasn't certain." He paused. "Don't underestimate that." She didn't answer right away. She was the kind of person who took compliments seriously, not dismissing them the way some people did, not accepting them too quickly either, but actually considering them the way she considered everything. "Thank you," she said finally, "for coming." "Thank you for the work you'd already done before I got here," he said. "I showed up and put a legal frame around something you'd already built." He shook Pete's hand, gave Colt a brief pat on the head that Colt accepted with grave dignity, and rode out. Ethan watched him go. "Good man," Pete said from beside him. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "Better lawyer than he lets on," Clara said. The three of them stood in the yard for a moment after the dust from Garrison's horse had settled, and then they went back to work. Cole came back 10 days later. Not with bad news, his face when he rode up had a different quality than it had carried during the investigation. Something looser and more forthcoming. He came to deliver a formal update, and he did it at the kitchen table over coffee, which felt almost normal after the weeks of crisis that had preceded it. The federal indictment had been formally accepted by the circuit court in Helena. 12 counts, all sustained. Victor Caldwell had retained lawyers from back east and entered a plea of not guilty, which Cole said with the calm expression of a man who had heard that particular plea before and knew what it was worth. The trial would be in Helena in approximately 4 months. The circuit court had jurisdiction over all property fraud charges. County Judge Harlan was himself under investigation for his role in the scheme. Sears's testimony had implicated him directly in at least 3 of the fraudulent transfers. The 11 families named in the documentation were each being contacted by federal representatives regarding restitution of improperly transferred property where legally possible. Cole delivered all of this in order and with precision, and then closed his notebook. "Is there anything else you need from us?" Ethan asked. "Sworn depositions from both of you in the next 30 days, Cole said. "I'll send written questions through Garrison. It's simpler than bringing you both to Helena." He looked between them. "Beyond that, no. You've done your part." He stood up. "I'll be honest with you. Cases like this usually don't come together the way this one did. Usually by the time someone gets to us, they've lost enough that the evidence is thin and the witnesses are scared into silence." He looked at Clara. "This case is different because you didn't stop building it even when you had every reason to stop." Clara looked at him. "I had a very specific kind of help," she said. Cole glanced at Ethan. "I noticed," he said, and picked up his hat. The letter from Wyoming arrived on a Tuesday in September. It was addressed to Clara in a handwriting she didn't recognize, but somehow knew anyway. Careful, slightly cramped, the handwriting of someone who had learned to write small as an economy of space or privacy. She opened it at the kitchen table alone. Ethan was in the pasture, and Pete was in the barn, and she was glad for the solitude in the way you're glad to be alone for something that might undo you. She read it through twice. Margaret Hollis was alive. She was living in Laramie, Wyoming, under a different name, working in a dry goods store owned by her cousin's husband. She had read about the federal indictment in a newspaper 2 weeks earlier, and had spent those 2 weeks deciding whether to write. She had decided to write. The letter was short, a page and a half, and it said several things. It said that she was sorry she hadn't found a way to warn the woman who came after her. It said that she had been paid $200 and told that if she ever spoke about what she'd seen in the accounts, the payment would be the least of what she lost. It said that she had been afraid. And then it said in the second to last paragraph, something that made Clara set the letter down and press her hands flat on the table and look at the ceiling until she was certain of herself again. "I read your name in the paper," Margaret Hollis had written, "and I thought she did what I couldn't. She stayed and she said it and she made it matter. I don't know you, but I want you to know that what you did gave me back something I didn't think I'd get back. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with it, but it's mine again, and that's because of you." Clara sat at the table for a long time. When Ethan came in from the pasture, she was still sitting there. The letter was in front of her, and her eyes were wet, not crying exactly, but close. He stopped in the doorway. "Clara," he said. She picked up the letter and held it out to him. He came to the table and took it and read it standing up. She watched his face as he read. She had learned his face the way she'd learned to read accounts, with the kind of attention that catches the small movements, the things people don't know they're showing. He set the letter down. He sat down across from her. "You saved her," he said, "even before you knew she existed." "I didn't do it for her," Clara said. "I didn't know about her." "Doesn't matter why you started," he said. "Matters what it did." She looked at the letter. "She said it gave her something back," Clara said. "I know what that means. I know exactly what she means by it." She paused. "I got mine back too. Somewhere between that first night at this table and the day Cole said the indictment was filed." "What was it?" he asked. "The thing you got back." She thought about it. "The belief that I'm not someone things just happen to," she said. "That I'm someone who happens to things." He looked at her across the table. "I knew that about you," he said, "about 4 days after you got here." "4 days," she said. "What happened in 4 days?" "You reorganized my entire filing system," he said, without being asked, and then explained to me calmly why the old one was going to cause me problems at tax time, and then went back to work like it was obvious. He paused. "That's not a person things happen to." She looked at him. Then she laughed, the full, real laugh that still surprised him a little, every time, the one that meant she'd let her guard all the way down. "Your filing system was terrible," she said. "It was a disaster," he agreed. She reached across the table and picked up the letter and folded it carefully along its original creases. "I'm going to write back to her," she said. "Good," he said. "I'm going to tell her she should come forward for the trial if she's willing. Her testimony would matter." "It would," he said. "And I'm going to tell her—" She stopped, looked at the folded letter, "that being afraid doesn't mean you lost. It means you were fighting something worth being afraid of." He was quiet for a moment. "You should have been a lawyer," he said. "I have a better job," she said. She set the letter down and met his eyes, and the simplicity of it, the plainness of the moment. Two people at a table in a ranch kitchen in Montana in September settled around them like something they'd been building toward for a long time, without knowing its name. The trial was in January. They both went to Helena. Pete stayed at the ranch, which he insisted on without discussion, and which they accepted because arguing with Pete about the ranch was a losing proposition. Helena in January was cold in a way that came through the walls of buildings and settled in the bones, and Clara wore 2 layers under her coat and still felt it. She and Ethan stayed at separate boarding houses. She had suggested it practically before he could suggest otherwise, because she was still the kind of woman who understood how things looked in a small territorial capital in 1882, and she wasn't inclined to give anyone grounds for distraction from what they were there to do. He had accepted this without argument and without making her feel small for it, which she noted and appreciated, and filed next to all the other things she had noted and appreciated over the past 4 months. They gave their depositions on the second day. Garrison was there managing the documentation with the same unhurried efficiency he'd brought to the kitchen table in August. Amos Pruitt was there, Thomas Hale was there, and 2 families from the South Valley, and Roy Sears in a separate room with his attorney and his immunity agreement. And on the third day, Margaret Hollis walked through the doors of the federal courthouse. Clara saw her from across the room and knew her immediately, not from memory, because she'd never seen her face. She knew her the way you know someone you've been connected to through a thread. You couldn't see the way the shape of a person can match what you've imagined without matching anything you could have described. Margaret was a compact woman, dark-haired with the careful posture of someone who had spent a long time trying to take up less space. She came through the door and stopped, and her eyes moved across the room, and then they found Clara. They looked at each other from 20 feet apart. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. Clara took 2 steps forward. Margaret took 2 steps forward. And they met in the middle of that cold federal hallway, and Clara put out her hand, and Margaret took it and held it for a moment, and the handshake turned into something that was almost an embrace, and then became one brief, not performed entirely real. "You came," Clara said. "You told me to," Margaret said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "I didn't think you would," Clara said honestly. "Neither did I," Margaret said. "And then I thought about what you did with nothing more than what I'd left behind. And I thought she didn't have what I have, and she still did it. What's my excuse?" Clara looked at her. "You don't need an excuse," she said. "Fear is not an excuse. It's a reason. You're here now." Margaret nodded once. She pressed her lips together. "Is he here?" she asked. "He will be," Clara said, "for the proceedings." Something moved through Margaret's face. Not fear exactly. Closer to the thing that comes after fear when you've been afraid of something long enough that the fear starts to transform into the harder thing. Ethan appeared at Clara's shoulder. He'd come from across the room when he'd seen the 2 women, and he stopped just at Clara's side, not intrusive, not absent, present. "Miss Hollis," he said simply, "I'm glad you're here." Margaret looked at him, then at Clara, then back at him. "This is the rancher," she said. "Yes," Clara said. "The one who let you through the gate," Margaret said. "Yes." Margaret studied him for a moment, with the evaluating gaze of a woman who had learned the hard way to read people quickly and accurately. "Good," she said finally. "Just that. Good." The trial itself took 3 days. Victor Caldwell sat at the defendant's table in a suit that cost more than most men in the territory earned in a year, and he maintained throughout the expression of a man who had decided to perform patience. His lawyers were skilled and prepared, and they worked methodically through every piece of documentation, challenging provenance and methodology and chain of custody. Garrison was better. How was precise where they were broad specific, where they were general, and when he laid Clara's reconstructed account records beside Sutter's certified documentation, beside Roy Sears's direct testimony, beside Margaret Hollis's account of what she'd seen and what had happened to her. The picture that emerged in that courtroom was so complete and so consistent that even Caldwell's best lawyer couldn't find a significant gap to step through. Clara testified on the second day. She sat in the witness chair in that cold courtroom, and she answered every question in the same voice she used to explain a ledger discrepancy, direct, precise, unhurried. When Caldwell's lawyer tried to undermine her on the basis of the original theft charge, Garrison had the dismissal of that charge, which had been formally entered once Roy Sears's testimony corroborated her account, entered into the record before the question finished, leaving the man's mouth. She looked at Victor Caldwell once during her testimony. Just once. He met her gaze with the particular stillness of a man who is recalculating the cost of something and finding it higher than expected. She looked away from him first. Not because she was intimidated, because he wasn't worth the sustained attention anymore. Margaret testified on the third day. She was shakier than Clara on the stand. Her voice lost steadiness in the middle, and she had to stop twice and collect herself. But she was precise. She had a good memory too. Clara had learned in the weeks of letters they'd exchanged a different kind of precision than Clara's more narrative, more emotional, but no less accurate. When Margaret described the night Caldwell's men had come to her room with an envelope of money and a very clear description of the alternative to taking it, the courtroom was completely quiet. The jury took 4 hours. All 12 counts guilty. Caldwell was sentenced to 14 years in the federal penitentiary. Judge Harlan, who had been in his own separate legal proceedings since October, was removed from the bench and faced county charges. The 2 county office clerks who had been on Caldwell's payroll entered plea agreements and cooperated with the federal investigation in exchange for reduced sentences. The 11 families named in the documentation received official notice that their cases were under federal review for restitution of improperly transferred properties. It would take time. Legal processes always took time, but the mechanism was in motion, which was more than any of them had thought possible 6 months ago. Amos Pruitt on the steps of the courthouse. After the verdict, shook Ethan's hand for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "I thought I was just going to lose that land and live with it." "You almost did," Ethan said. "But I didn't," Amos said. "Because someone didn't." He looked at Clara. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. Old Western courtesy, the kind that meant something rather than nothing. Clara shook his hand. "Thank you for coming forward," she said. "That took courage too." They rode back to Harlan Creek on a Friday. The journey from Helena was 2 days, and they rode the first day mostly in silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of people who have nothing to say, but the full silence of people who have said so much over so many months that silence is simply another form of the same conversation. On the second day, somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, Clara said, "I've been thinking about Margaret." "What about her?" Ethan asked. "She's still in Laramie, still working in her cousin's store." Clara paused. "She came all the way to Helena and she testified, and then she went back to hiding." "She's not hiding," Ethan said. "She's living somewhere safe." "I know," Clara said. "But she doesn't have to stay hidden. The thing she was hiding from is in a federal penitentiary." She looked at the road ahead. "I wrote her a letter last week, before the verdict. I told her that when this was done, if she wanted to come to Harlan Creek, there was a community that had recently learned some hard lessons about judging people on the basis of accusations and might be ready to do better." Ethan looked at her. "You invited her here," he said. "I offered her the possibility," she said. "She might not take it." "And if she does," Clara looked at him. "Then maybe Harlan Creek gets a very good bookkeeper," she said, "and Margaret Hollis gets a life she chose instead of one she was pushed into." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You can't save everyone," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I can write a letter." He looked at the road. "There's a small house on the north edge of town," he said. "Old Henderson Place. It's been sitting empty since Henderson moved to Bozeman." He paused. "Needs work. Nothing Pete and I couldn't handle in a few weeks." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You're already planning it," she said. "I'm thinking about it," he said. She shook her head slowly. "You let a stranger through your gate," she said, "and now you're fixing up houses for people who might come." "Not might," he said. "Will. People come when they know there's something worth coming to." She looked at him. "Is that wisdom or stubbornness?" she asked. "In my experience," he said, "they're usually the same thing." They came back to the ranch on a Friday evening. Pete was waiting on the porch with coffee because Pete always knew when they were going to arrive, and he handed them their cups without ceremony and went back to his chair, and the 3 of them sat on the porch in the January cold with their coats on and their coffee steaming and Colt moving around the yard below them, and nobody said much because there wasn't much that needed to be said. After a while, Pete said, "Horses are good." "Good," Ethan said. "Duchess ran the south pasture twice yesterday," Pete said. "She's getting faster." "I know," Clara said with a satisfaction that she didn't try to hide. Pete drank his coffee. "I fixed the last of the barn wall while you were gone," he said. "Used the better timber. It'll hold better than the original." Ethan looked at the barn. "Good," he said. Another comfortable silence. Then Pete said, "That man's really going to prison for 14 years." "Yes," Ethan said. Pete nodded once. He looked at his coffee. "Good," he said. 3 weeks after they returned, Harlan Creek changed in the small and incremental way that towns change when the thing they've been organized around turns out to have been wrong. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in the way most real things happen, one gesture at a time, one acknowledgement at a time, one person deciding to do the slightly harder thing instead of the slightly easier one. Mrs. Garrett brought the preserves she'd promised. She came to the ranch on a Saturday morning and she handed the jar to Clara at the door and she said, "I know it's late. I should have come sooner." "You're here now," Clara said. And she meant it. The woman who ran the dry goods store started greeting Clara by name when she came in. Small thing. Significant thing. Walt Briggs organized a meeting of the affected families with the federal restitution representative. He did it in the community hall, and he sent word around to every small ranch in the South Valley, and he didn't ask anyone's permission. And Amos Pruitt came back to Harlan Creek. I didn't have his land back yet. That was in the hands of the federal process, which was slow, as it always was. But he came back. He took a room at the boarding house, and he started showing up at Dolan's feed store, and at the hardware store, and at the general meeting. Walt Briggs organized, and he looked like a man who had decided that being run out of a place didn't mean you had to stay run out. "I'm going to be here when they give me that land back," he told Ethan one afternoon. "I want to be standing on Main Street when it happens." "You will be," Ethan said. "You sound sure of that," Amos said. "I've watched the way you come back," Ethan said. "You've got the look of a man who knows how to wait." Amos looked at him. "Learned it from watching someone else," he said. The letter from Margaret Hollis came in February. Clara read it at the kitchen table, and she read it twice, and then she set it down and went to find Ethan, who was in the barn, running his hand along Duchess's flank and checking a small cut on her foreleg that had come from the fence line. He looked up when Clara came in. She held up the letter. He straightened. "She's coming," Clara said. He looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly. More like the quiet satisfaction of a man whose estimation of the world has been confirmed rather than corrected. "When?" he asked. "First week of March," Clara said. "She's giving her cousin's family 2 weeks' notice." She looked at the letter again. She says she's been thinking about what I told her. That being afraid doesn't mean you lost. That it means you were fighting something worth being afraid of." She paused. "She says she's ready to stop fighting and start living." He crossed the barn to stand beside her. He read the letter over her shoulder. "The Henderson house will be ready," he said. "I know," she said. "I told Pete last week." He looked at her. "You told Pete before you knew she was coming," he said. "I told Pete because I believed she was coming," she said simply. He was quiet. "Clara," he said. "Yes." I didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the letter in her hands and then at her face in the winter light that came through the barn's high window. And he thought about a gate he'd opened on a summer morning, because something in him had known even then that looking away was not something he was willing to do anymore. "I have something I want to ask you," he said. She lowered the letter. She looked at him directly, as she always did, without the protective distance that had been in her eyes when she'd first walked through his gate. "Ask," she said. "I asked you twice before," he said. "Once in the yard and once in the barn. Both times you said yes." He held her gaze. "This time, I'm asking differently." She waited. "Will you stay?" he said. "Not because there's nowhere else to go. Not because it's practical or safe or convenient. But because this is home, and you know it, and I know it, and there's nothing left standing in the way of saying so." The barn was quiet. Duchess moved softly in her stall. Clara looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that does the work 100 words would do, moving through everything they'd built and fought and said and not said over the past 6 months. "Yes," she said, for the third time. And this time it carried everything the other times had been building toward. He took her hand. She let him. They stood in the barn in February in Montana, and it was cold enough to see their breath, and neither of them minded. In the spring, the Henderson house was finished. Margaret Hollis arrived on a Wednesday in March, exactly when she'd said she would, on the stage from Billings with one trunk and a carrying case, and the posture of someone who has made a decision they're not going to unmake. Clara met her at the stage stop. They didn't need the careful formality of a reintroduction. 4 months of letters had taken care of that. Clara simply said, "Welcome to Harlan Creek." And Margaret looked at the town around her, the people moving on the street, the storefronts and the dusty road and the big sky over all of it, and she said, "It's smaller than I expected." "Most places are," Clara said. "Is it?" Margaret paused. "Is it all right, the people here? Are they?" "They're learning," Clara said honestly. "Some of them faster than others, but they're trying." She paused. "Amos Pruitt is here. Walt Briggs. People who know what it cost and what it took." Margaret nodded slowly. "And the rancher," she said. "Ethan," Clara said. "Yes. Is he?" "He fixed your house himself," Clara said. "He and Pete spent 3 weeks on it. New roof timber, new floor in the kitchen. He said if he was going to do it, he was going to do it right." Margaret looked at her. "Why?" she said. "Because that's who he is," Clara said simply. "That's just who he is." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "You're lucky," she said. "I know," Clara said. They walked down the main street of Harlan Creek together, 2 women who had been set against each other by the same man's fear, who had found each other through letters and courage and the work of building truth from the rubble of what he'd tried to destroy. A few people watched them walk. Most did nothing. Some nodded. Mrs. Garrett, coming out of the dry goods store, said, "Good morning," and meant it. It was a small thing. It was the right thing. Margaret looked straight ahead, and Clara walked beside her, and by the time they reached the end of the street where the Henderson house sat, clean windows, new timber, smoke already rising from the kitchen pipe, because Ethan had started a fire that morning, so the place would be warm when she arrived. Margaret's shoulders had dropped about an inch from where they'd been when she'd stepped off the stage. Clara noticed. She didn't say anything about it. Some things you let a person have without making a point of them. That evening, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch. The spring was coming in, not arrived yet, but present at the edges of things, in the smell of the air, and the way the horses moved in the pasture with something looser than they'd had in February. "She's going to be all right," Clara said. "Yes," he said. "She just needs time." "Yes." She looked out at the pasture. "I've been thinking about writing to some of the other families," she said. "The ones from the South Valley. The restitution process is going to take time, and they need someone helping them document and file the right forms." He looked at her. "You'd do that," he said. Not surprised, just confirming. "I know how to read the legal language," she said. "I know what the forms require, and I know what it's like to have something that's yours and not be able to prove it." She paused. "Someone should help them." "Someone should," he agreed. "Pete thinks I should charge for it," she said. "He says there's no reason I should do legal documentation work for free." "Pete's not wrong," Ethan said. She smiled. "I know," she said. "I'm still deciding." He stretched his legs out in front of him. "Whatever you decide," he said, "this ranch has enough room for it." She looked at him. "I know." "No," she said. "That's why I'm staying." The evening came down around them, the particular soft quality of a spring evening that has earned itself through a hard winter. Colt moved on the steps below. From the barn, one of the horses called out once and settled. Clara leaned her head back against her chair. "Ethan," she said. "Yes." "Ask me one more time," she said quietly. "The last time. Just so it's said without anything else attached to it. Just so it's said in peace." He turned to look at her. In the fading light, she was exactly what she was. Clara Bennett, who had come through his gate with a bruised jaw and worn-through boots, and 3 years of running in her eyes and the most precise mind he'd ever encountered. Who had built a case from memory in a kitchen. Who had gone into a burning barn without flinching. Who had written a letter to a woman she didn't know and believed she'd come. "Will you stay?" he said. She turned to look at him. "I'm already home," she said. The porch held them both. The ranch held them both. And Harlan Creek, Montana, in the spring of 1883, was not the town it had been the summer before, because two people who had every reason to stop trusting had chosen against all available evidence to trust one more time. And that, as it turned out, was the only thing that needed to happen. A woman who had been told she was nothing had proven she was the one who changed everything. And the rancher who had been waiting for a reason to believe in something again had found one standing at his gate one summer morning, covered in road dust, with her chin up and her eyes clear and nothing left to lose. That was the whole of it. That was enough.